Okay, so I'm going to do a little short little live stream today on Valentine's Day, the 14th of February. So if you're watching this, you're probably single like me and doing nothing. Um, Six Nations has obviously started last weekend, and we've only got one game left of this second round of fixtures, which is Ireland France. It's really interesting things to note. We're finally seeing refereeing consistency. Also, since the last live stream, we've had the fifth round of the FA Cup midweek games. What are people's thoughts on that? I myself, the games that I watched, one of them sent me to sleep, and the other two games that I watched both finished 1-0 and didn't seem to have the same pace on the ball, the same intensity. It was teams going through the motions, it seems. So, what are people's thoughts on having midweek FA Cup games that aren't replays? Because we know replays have been scrapped for this year, but I think that's a long term thing post. I think every round now, I think the FA will probably scrap replays long term. So that's a debating point. Obviously, Liverpool's complete collapse in form. Something else if you're a football or a soccer fan to pay attention. They are a global brand, and their collapse in form has been noted. Same with PSG in France. They're not the invincible force that they were. Tuchel's obviously now the Chelsea boss. Pochettino's now the PSG boss. Mourinho's under pressure at Tottenham with some of their poor form and the whole Gareth Bale situation. Should he be in the side? Should he not be in the side? They've got an option to sign him for next year on loan as well because they can't afford the transfer fee. So the Tampa Bay Buccaneers winning the Super Bowl, the first team to actually win the Super Bowl in their home stadium and their home city. That's the thing. And Brady just defying the aging process with Gronkowski. I don't know how those two guys are doing, considering that Gronkowski's initially retired because of concussions. So that raises the question of the NFL's concussion protocols. But I want to talk about the Six Nations because this is really, really interesting. Really interesting. I've got all the matches that I've watched here. I mean, I've got notes coming out my backside to do with the Six Nations. Really been a really interesting first two weekends. I know obviously the France Ireland game is going to kick off later today. England, same problems. Doesn't seem that Eddie Jones has solutions for those problems. Scotland, Wales, and Ireland. I'm going to say indifferent. I know Wales are currently sitting nice and pretty at the top of the table, but they've been helped by two red cards, and there are still some issues there with the whole Wayne Pivac. Is he the right man to coach the sides? Certain players who are constantly injury prone, certain players being selected on previous deeds. Same with Ireland, Scotland. They imploded yesterday, quite frankly. And while they're looking the more rounded article and they're looking the more rounded team than what they were previously, and their defence has massively improved. And Finn Russell's been brought back into the side, and that seems to have a positive impact. His game is rounded off. I still think there's issues with Scotland. Ireland, this is the red herring of the group is Ireland. How they perform against France today is going to give us an indicative long-term look at the Ireland side, because I think they are again selecting players on previous deeds that done. They looked a bit. Well, they looked second best against Wales. Yes, the red card didn't help, but there were significant flaws in their game. Admittedly, they played better with 14 men than I thought they would, but concerns about depth at fly half, concerns about depth in other key positions as well. And I think the French are being written off by people. Looking on the first weekend of action and the game so far this second weekend, I think the French are actually that step ahead. It's just consistency with the French and what French team turns up and how they perform. But they seem to have improved selection, more stable in selection. They've got more depth now in key positions. The fly half position seems to have been cured in a sense that they now have several fly halves competing for that number 10 jersey, which I think is massively important. So that's an interesting debating point. Place your questions in that comment section, because I've had some interesting comments on the Six Nations reviews that I've done on the matches that I've watched, because I missed bits of Italy, France, and what the Italians showed is they have no fear. And there's some nice green shoots with the Italians with player development, some of their young players, and they showed patches against England that they are dangerous and they shouldn't be underestimated, and they're going to be difficult for some of these other teams. I think Ireland could be possibly exposed as possible wooden spooners. Now, Ireland, we've been graced in the rugby world for having a pretty strong competitive Ireland side for 20 years, but cast back to the 90s when Ireland were absolutely hopeless. They were terrible. And if the Italians had come into the Six Nations sooner, I think they would have beaten Ireland quite regularly. Ireland in the 90s were a really poor side. Fast forward 25, 30 years, and we're seeing an ageing Ireland squad with its core players and some concerning depth issues at international level for fly half and scrum half that are being exposed. And they're your key playmakers. The forward pack as well, there's some ageing, creaking players in there. There's some depth issues there. The back line, the outside backs themselves, there's some good young talented players there. But in key positions in the forward pack and in 9 and 10, I have concerns with Ireland. And I fear that Ireland could go back in time and repeat 20 odd years ago, 30 odd years ago, where they were quite literally woeful. Absolutely woeful. Scotland, fast forward 20 years, it's taken 20 years for Scotland to get decent again. So this is a cyclical thing. I mean, England, while they're the most successful Six Nations side, are also the Six Nations team with the most wooden spoons. So Italy have got a long way to go before they get England's record. So for those people saying, "Oh, Italy should be replaced by Georgia or Romania," I don't think they realise that Georgia is a one-trick pony. They have a forward pack. Their back line is not on the same standard. Romania, there's massive issues with the team declining. So for those saying, "Oh, put Romania or Georgia in the Six Nations," they're going to get spanked every weekend. They're just going to do nothing. Italy at least are competitive and have won games. The fact they're going through a bit of a downswing with things at the moment shouldn't mean they should be booted. If we're going to do that, then historically you could say, well, why did France take 20 years to start getting a winning record? Why did Ireland, for a long period of time, why were they useless? They were still there. So you got that interesting debate, and yes, the game's more professional, but the Italians have got some pretty decent players. And from what they showed in patches, if they can get an 80-minute performance together, they are dangerous. And I think Ireland are the most vulnerable side, but it all depends on how Ireland respond to that defeat last week and how they play against France today. We'll see on that. On the FA Cup side of things, before I delve into other topics, midweek games. They did this in the last couple of seasons. Before COVID, there was concerns from the FA that attendances were falling, especially in the third round onwards, because the third round is the cherry on the cake there. The third round is where the small sides have that opportunity to giant kill for the first time. So this is where Championship and Premiership sides join the competition. They're still non-league sides, most likely in the competition. League One and League Two clubs have had a couple of rounds, and some of those clubs have got pretty big fan bases and historically are big clubs. And you get the giant killing round, as we call it, the graveyard of champions, as we call it. And figures for viewing and figures for attendance at games have been falling. So the FA decided to move certain fixtures to midweek. They did it last season as well, before COVID. They were muting that they were suggesting that they were going to move fixtures to midweek. They decided on the fifth round. Now we know that replays have been a debate as well, and fixture congestion. Now this season we understand why there are no replays in the FA Cup. We understand why they have had to condense the season. The issue I have with that is, while they've taken replays out the equation to reduce congestion of fixtures, the FA and the various leagues and the professional and non-professional games, so the non-league as well, haven't left themselves massive amount of flexibility. They haven't. There isn't the flexibility there, because you look at the amount of games postponed, and I'm not joking. You look at the amount of games postponed so far this season, games lost. There is already some. I mean, the non-league below the National League structure, which is National League North and South, and the National League itself. Some of these teams haven't played since December. It's 2 months. When Marine were playing Tottenham, for example, that could be their last game of the season, and that is in the FA Cup. When you look at Chorley against Derby, they hadn't played for a long time. So it's an interesting one. Cricket. I haven't actually been following the cricket per se, because I don't have, a working TV area or satellite dish in my flat, because there's some issues with the building maintenance. But India, cricket and corruption, they go hand in hand. It's not a new allegation to be made. All you have to do is go back a few years and the Srisanth situation. I wasn't going to discuss the cricket because I haven't been watching it, but yes, the series is on free-to-air coverage, which is good to see. Free-to-air coverage of a Test series, which fans have been crying out for a long time. And I think the ECB have finally realised we're having so many people cancel their Sky subscriptions, we're going to lose money. Um, that because I haven't watched the game, and therefore I haven't watched any of the series, to be fair, and therefore I can't really have a whole judgment call. The thing is, I've done videos in the past on corruption allegations involving um, India and Pakistan. I have, and England and Australian players. There are allegations out there where there are links where the sport itself has a corruption problem. Now, the only country in the world that actually has um, a funded police unit is Australia for anti-corruption when it comes to sport and organised crime links. Australia is where they have the best funding for a specialist police investigations unit that deals with these allegations. And every test nation has had players accused of or found guilty of match fixing. It doesn't matter if it's in the domestic game or the international game. And I use Sri Santham as an example. I could have used Hansi Cronje as an example of a famous match fixing incident. We know in the IPL several team owners have been accused and found guilty of, corruption to do with the sport. And I mean, I could do a video on Hansi Cronje and what happened there with the fact he actually lied on the record under oath to the investigating committee at the South African Parliament, which is very similar to the parliamentary select committees we have here in the UK. He was accused of taking bribes to fix matches. Ironically, he was playing in India in a test series at the time as captain of South Africa. And it took several years for the allegations to come out, and he lied under oath. He lied. It sent shockwaves through not only Test cricket, but in South Africa, after rugby union, cricket is like a religion. There is no debating that. And the more professional the game gets, and the more global exposure the game gets, the more these allegations keep surfacing. And I think every Test nation and ICC member nation, that includes one day and T20s, has had at one point at least a player or players or officials accused of corruption. Same with Sri Lanka, India, Pakistan, England have had players. I forget the county player's name, but he was given a ban for taking money to throw no balls and stuff. We remember the Pakistan-England Test series about a decade ago, which resulted in 3 players getting banned and going to prison. But these allegations just simmer in the background. Yes, the ICC does have an anti-corruption unit, but there's only one police force in the world that deals with sports corruption, and that's in Australia. With the Australian Federal Police has a dedicated task force to this type of crime, which is massively surprising considering that gambling is illegal in so many countries around the world. And as I'm an NHL fan, so I love my ice hockey and all that. And obviously, Canada's had a regulated gambling for decades, much like the UK with betting shops and online bookmakers. The US has now started to liberalise its gambling laws. And this is one of the concerns that American sports fans and sports commentators actually have, is the NFL, the NHL, the NBA, Major League Baseball, Major League Soccer, Major League Rugby even, these professional sports in North America being exposed to this type of fix, this type of corruption. And not all the states in the US have regulated and legalized gambling yet. But the fact that while the test is being played, that this is coming out, these allegations are being made, and fans, us the people taking the game, are going, that is a bit suspicious. Yeah, that's sort of the worry that other sports have, where in other jurisdictions where gambling is still illegal or heavily regulated or not as accessible, they have concerns about liberalising the gambling rules. And in India, they have very strict gambling rules. And what you find in India and Singapore and Southeast Asia and all that, there is, I know it depends on the state and the jurisdiction in the US, It does. There are certain states that haven't legalised it. Um, so in one jurisdiction you can bet, and other jurisdictions you can't, apart from on state lotteries. And if you watch the Pat McAfee show, which is he's an ex NFL player, it's a great laugh. They are sponsored by a betting company, one of their major sponsors, and they do discuss betting regulation. And while they're happy that it's all legalised and regulated, what is very, very interesting is until a couple of years ago, only certain jurisdictions and states had allowed gambling. Nevada was obviously everyone thinks of, Vegas and Reno and all that, and the strips there and the massive amount of casinos and hotels. Atlantic City was another major gambling hotspot. And it is interesting the links with organised crime at these locations, and the fact that the US have been very, very strict in its gambling laws. That doesn't mean that match fixing and gambling allegations and corruption haven't surfaced in North American sports, and they have had some big scandals. The Chicago Black Sox scandal, for example, in the World Series, where they deliberately threw matches for bribes. It's there. Certain sports are more exposed to match fixing and corruption than others. That's just a known fact. Cricket is one of them. Baseball is another. Snooker, darts, tennis. Tennis has a corruption problem and it's been exposed. Boxing. Boxing is a very worrying sport when you look at it on the match fixing or boxers taking a dive or interfering with referees and judges, and that there's been issues with boxing and fixing fights for forever. It's been going on since Victorian times when the sport was bare knuckle. It's there. The Trippier situation and the Sturridge situation, they're basically the same thing. Trippier and Sturridge, they did the same thing. Inside knowledge on impending transfers of themselves, the player, and informing friends and family members to make bets, which is basically insider trading. If you're able to do that on the stock market, we're going to prison for a very long time. We're going to federal jail in America. We're going to have some serious jail time. I think insider trading is naughty. It is. I could discuss about the GameStop, on the other channel on a live stream there, which I might do after the rugby's over. I think the Trippier one, he's still technically suspended. There's still an appeals process in place, and of course, La Liga and the Spanish FA didn't suspend him. The FA did, and he was already in the process of moving to Atletico Madrid. Now, Atletico Madrid, and Diego Simeone and the club president, they said, look, we're going to support the player. He's our employee. We have a duty of care, which is perfectly reasonable. Perfectly reasonable. I have no doubt on Atletico Madrid's integrity. Obviously, Trippier is trying to appeal his suspension. Sturridge as well. Sturridge initially denied the allegations and then actually admitted them. But it raises the question, and we were having the debate about betting companies sponsoring sport and on the sports jerseys and on the advertising hoardings and on the adverts in games. And this debate was being had before Sturridge and Trippier were banned by the FA, and the bans were upheld by UEFA and FIFA as well. We were having this debate long before they fell afoul of betting rules. Stuart Bingham in snooker is another one. Did a video on that as well. It's going to be interesting. Madrid say they will support the player because he's under contract. He's their employee. It's their duty of care. That is fine. I don't know if they're going to try and, have the ban overturned. They're going to leave that to the authorities to do. They signed the player, and it's up to the footballing authorities and the Court of Arbitration for Sport and the various legal avenues, I think, to go through. I think Trippier doesn't have a case to appeal, though, personally. It's there in black and white with the messages sent between him and his friend about basically, have a bet on it. I don't know what's going on. The European Super League. Well, the fan reaction says it all. And you have to go back to when La Liga wanted to take games to the US, and the fact that the players said no, and the fact that FIFA and UEFA are now on the same book saying players who play for clubs who sign up to this will be barred from international competition. That's divided the fan base. A lot of fans go, "Oh, international football sucks." The club country debate. But when your governing body FIFA goes, "We'll ban players," um, tells you something. UEFA, it's the domestic clubs going over the heads of their domestic FAs and over the heads of the UEFA and FIFA and saying we're just going to do our own thing. I will say this: rival leagues to an established competition tend to fail. I go and use Australia and North America as examples of this with the Super League war in the rugby league in Australia, which is why we have the NRL. The existing, what was the New South Wales rugby league competition, which had Queensland sides in it, won in the end. The WHA in the ice hockey against the NHL, they were signing players to big contracts and they were overextending themselves and they didn't really do the background checks on owners. And the league collapsed after less than a decade. And only 4 teams survived who are still currently playing in the NHL out of the whole league. Teams were being relocated mid-season and changing name mid-season. Now, in football's case, you've got established clubs. The problem is some of these clubs have not been successful for a while and on the downswing. And they're historically successful, yes. But at the same time, I think the Champions League and this is partly to do with UEFA's decision to scrap the Cup Winners' Cup and how they formatted the UEFA Cup, now the Europa League and the Champions League. They made changes in the 90s, all to do with revenue. But you're looking at group games that are dead rubbers. I'm kind of glad the Champions League and Europa League isn't actually on free-to-air TV, to be honest. So many dead rubbers. So many teams going through the motions. You get the occasional shock in there, but I think straight knockout. If it was straight knockout, Celtic would have knocked out Barcelona several times in the last couple of Champions League straight knockout ties. If that was the format pre '97, still continuing in the Cup Winners' Cup, Celtic could have knocked out Barcelona, I think twice. And the knockouts is where it gets exciting. This is where the Cup Winners' Cup and the old UEFA Cup kept their luster for a while until again Europa League format came in. They brought in the group stage and they changed that, and then it lost its vibe. I will say this though, I do think they should go back to straight knockdowns because then teams will not field weakened teams in the group stage, and you have it's winner takes all. I think that brings a lot more nerviness to it. Teams will want to go out and win. In regulation, you won't get those penalty shootouts, for example, in the knockout stages as much because teams just know that they've got to win. They want to reduce these managers are complaining about fixture congestion, and these clubs agree to the UEFA Cup format and the Europa League format. The clubs agree to it. The clubs themselves, the owners of the clubs, want to make as much revenue as possible. But then you get the managers and the players claiming this fixture congestion, we're tired, we're getting more injuries. And I think that's fact. I do think it's fact. The debate's there. I think we can argue it until the sun goes down and rises up again. You know, I think UEFA, if they're going to expand it, needs to go straight knockouts. Otherwise, it's just going to be too much fixture congestion, an extra round of fixtures, for example. And we've already had to see seasons condensed and some domestic leagues getting rid of their League Cup competition like France or restructuring their cup competitions over recent seasons. I think devaluing the domestic cup competitions over the last 20 years hasn't helped. And I think that's partly with the demise of the Cup Winners' Cup. That was my favourite European competition because you would get teams in that competition that otherwise wouldn't have made Europe under current qualification. You would get some really random teams and they would do really, really well. I can remember I was just old enough to remember Oxford United playing in the Cup Winners' Cup. Yeah, because they won the League Cup. I can remember that. Just. So you get some really random teams that otherwise you wouldn't expect to be there. And it's not always your champion league winner that gets in the Cup Winners' Cup. That's what's the joy of it. And getting rid of that format, I think, was a massive mistake by UEFA, and reformatting the Champions League in '97 was actually a massive mistake. They were chasing the money. The Super League talks disappeared. The reformatting of the Premier League disappeared because the fan reaction was wholly negative. And I think with that extra travel in there and devaluing existing cup competitions further, hasn't gone down well. It's the wealthiest clubs trying to cool the tune basically and be greedy, and it hasn't gone down well, especially in this economic climate. TV companies have got to sign up, and there's debate about some of the TV companies being dodgy. Oh yes, the owners of PSG own beIN Sports, and that in itself raises questions of integrity and conflict of interest. The TV deal in France has collapsed. The TV in Germany is on its knees. French fans, football is not the most popular sport in France. People are surprised to know that. Rugby union, rugby league, and ice hockey actually have pretty solid fan bases. And the fact that the French TV deal has collapsed tells you that if you take, PSG or Monaco, for example, let's say PSG and Monaco are the two teams that decide to do the Super League. The French fans are turning off because of PSG's continued unnecessary dominance. And I say that because they've bought the league. They have unlimited funds. Other clubs don't. And that's a problem. The best French players aren't playing in France. That's another problem. Whereas you look at the rugby union side, the best players are playing in France. And they have a much better TV deal in real terms. More people tune in to rugby union and football on a regular basis. More people feel a connect with rugby union, and the sport is in a healthy position. Football in France is in a mess. It's one of the big 5 leagues in Europe. You go to other countries in Europe, football is the second most popular sport. If you go to the Scandinavian countries and Switzerland and Austria and parts of Eastern Europe, ice hockey is actually more popular. It has a better TV deal. The leagues are more financially stable, more player development. And people go, oh, ice hockey, oh, it's a North American thing. It really isn't. It's the second most popular sport in Europe, continent-wide. It's why the European nations do really well at the World Championships every year. North American teams, not so much. Partly because the best players are released to play. And the seasons are staggered in such a way that they have these winter breaks where you can release players for the World Championships. You look at the French club structure. There's money in the second tier, which there isn't in the second tier in England and Italy and Ireland, for example, and Scotland and Wales, the other Six Nations. France has got a very strong domestic second tier rugby union, very strong. And there's some big clubs in there. It's more provincial than I think it should be in France. Southwest, same with rugby league. The industrial north is more football. But nationwide, ice hockey is played nationwide across the whole country in France. In the top and second tiers, there's clubs and teams in every major city. So it's how the sports have developed. But France is an interesting case because the share of the sports market in France is pretty. If you look at a pie chart, we think football would be top, but it really isn't. It's been declining in popularity for a while. And part of that is to do with PSG's artificial dominance. I put that out there. PSG haven't always been a top flight club. They've had periods in the second division in France. It does make you wonder with the French Football Federation, with how they've allowed PSG takeover to take place and a whole variety of issues there. But it is what it is. Historically, it's a very interesting league to look at for winners. And I can do some videos on some clubs like Nancy and Saint Etienne and Marseille and Montpellier and Bordeaux and Lyon and go. They've won trophies as well. It's not just the PSG show. There's a lot of history in French football. Same in German football. It hasn't always been Bayern Munich's to win. They weren't very successful before 1970. I'm going to put that out there. And Borussia Mönchengladbach were the more successful side in the 70s. They won more trophies. The 70s was Mönchengladbach's decade. But Munich, much like PSG, I think, not helped things. Well, they've been exceptionally successful. Hasn't actually helped necessarily the domestic product that you're trying to sell. The Premier League has had more winners since the Premier League has been formatted than the other big leagues in Europe. And it's interesting on the side of players representing at youth level one country and being poached by another. Rugby union and rugby league has a problem with that. Rugby union has a massive problem with that. On the cricket side of things, the county game is in crisis and has been for a while, and part of that is to do with the TV rights and the ECB's decision to chase the 100 format rather than actually pumping more interest into the T20 domestic game, the one-day domestic game, the county format. And fans are, well, their reaction says it all. It's going to be interesting. I think football over the last 20, 30 years has chased the money. It has. There's no denying where football's gone wrong. Yes, it's the global game in the sense that it's played in every country in the world, but at the same time, there has to be some accountability. And as I was saying, with these midweek cup ties, where the fifth round was played in midweek, it was teams that were going through the motions. There was, I think, one really exciting game, and it was the Tottenham Everton game, which had 9 goals in it. BT Sport. Thankfully, BT Sport loses the rights for next season, so that would have been on free-to-air TV on ITV or BBC if it was next season, but it's not. But the BBC, the 3 games on the BBC sent me to sleep. One of them actually did send me to sleep. And that was the Chelsea game. I actually fell asleep watching that. I actually had my notes ready. I was starting to take notes, and then I fell asleep. So I actually missed the goal and I missed the final result. But Sheffield United's game, VAR was the decider. The Man United West Ham game was painful, considering that both teams are in good form. Madness. It is good to see Channel 4 get the overseas Test cricket rights back. Australia had a similar debate where the Cricket World Cup was on a subscription-only service, and fans basically refused to subscribe to it. And very, very quickly, it was back on free-to-air and Fox very, very quickly. Channel 9 and Fox suddenly got the rights back within days of the Cricket World Cup starting because fans just rejected the subscription-only status with this media company, and that it just wasn't good enough. And that's what fans want is the Test and domestic game back on free-to-air TV. It's not hard. We don't want the 100. Yet they're still forging ahead with it, even though it's going to be a loss maker. I think that in itself is a head scratcher. And in order to fix matches in cricket, you have to have both sides or members of both sides actively involved to fix the whole Test match. To spot fix, you just need a couple of players to bowl a few no balls or drop a few catches or to deliberately get out, run themselves out. But to actually fix a whole series or a whole match, you would need to have both sets of players to go, yeah, right, we'll do this. Now, I did a video a couple of years ago of 3 unnamed England players being accused of match fixing. That still gets a lot of views, actually, many years after the event. It's the ICC does have an anti-corruption unit. They don't talk it up enough. But as I said earlier in the live stream, the only country in the world that has a dedicated police unit to sports corruption is Australia. When countries go, we're having an investigation into match fixing or spot fixing, they go to Australia for advice. You will see the FBI will actually contact the Australian Federal Police in Canberra and go, we're investigating a player or a coach or a syndicate who are domestically in the US. Can you give us some advice on how you deal with this? And there's a Canadian journalist, I forget his name, it's really frustrating because I've watched several documentaries where he's doing question answer sessions and he does, talks. And he found that the Canadian Soccer League, football, in Ontario, had a big problem where it was so obvious that matches were being fixed for overseas betting syndicates. And he did an expose on that, and then he went deep, deep undercover in Southeast Asia, and you know, it blew the lid on match fixing. There were some big syndicates in Singapore and the Philippines that the domestic judo competition in Japan was suspended for the first time since World War II, I think in 2011. The Chinese Super League football fans, look at the attendance, it's ridiculously low. The South Asian Games, and once they fixed all them and fans are switching off, they're now targeting Western sport. And I have seen some results where I'm questioning what I'm seeing in football, rugby union. It's harder to fix, I think, a rugby union, rugby league, and ice hockey matches because they're such collision sports that if you're going in half-hearted, you're going to get hurt, and it's going to be kind of obvious that you're not trying and the effort isn't there. And I've mentioned Operation Slapshot. There was some illegal gambling going on with high-profile players and coaches within the game, and guess what? Several of these now ex-players and coaches are still coaching within the game and still have in the NHL, and it's hardly covered. I'm only one of, I think, 2 YouTubers to mention Operation Slapshot. There's a video on I don't give a Kachuk. Yes, he's a American from New Jersey. He's a Flames fan, ironically, and he used my Operation Slapshot video as research because I'd spent days going through. I thought, I'm going to look at some sporting scandals, and I went through, got the whiteboard out, and I found out there's only one major sporting scandal in the NHL, and that was Operation Slapshot. The NBA and the NFL, the NBA had its own betting scandal with a referee, fixing matches and taking bribes. And he was very open and honest about it. He went to federal prison, and now he wrote a book and he explained what was going on with NBA referees in the 90s, the 2000s, and into the beginning of the 2010s when he was caught. And it's there. Collegiate sports are fixed all the time. Francesi, the former mafia capo, he's now reformed and he does talks and he's discussed corruption within sport. And he goes, it's harder to, get a player who's professional to fix matches or spot fix, but a college student, oh yeah, you can do that. I think his name is Michael Francesi, and he was a mafia made man in the New York area, and he served some time in prison, ironically. And one of his interviews had to do with sports corruption. He was interviewed by this Canadian journalist, and he just said, "Yeah, no, we've been fixing college, NCAA basketball, ice hockey, American football based, collegiate system for years because they're not on full-time contracts. They're students. They need money, and the American NCAA collegiate system is openly exposed to, corruption. It'll be interesting to note, looking at the rugby matches that I've seen with the Six Nations, I haven't seen a team not try to say that. It's a collision sport. If you're putting in no effort, you're going to get hurt. And players have got hurt putting 110% effort. Same with ice hockey. You can tell when a player's not. You can definitely see when a player's not actively participating in a play. You can see when there's a bad call. We have those debates all the time. Football's a little bit easier. So there's been some very suspicious results at World Cups and in Champions League and Europa League and domestic league games that you can go, something's not right here. And I've seen several games where I am questioning some of the tactics and players playing and how the game's played out. And I could definitely see with some of these midweek FA Cup games that I'm scratching my head with some of the results. Absolutely. Cricket, though, is far more exposed. Hansi Cronje, I think, is the best example of a match fix. But then you look at the Pakistan-England series, I think in 2011, where 3 players ended up going to prison. The ball tampering scandal with Australia, to get a ball replacement, that is an interesting one. And you got the Freddie Flintoff, Robbie Savage, and the Ping Pong Guy podcast on BBC. Matthew Saeed is his name. He's an ex-ping pong player, table tennis player, a champion player as well. So these are all ex-sportsmen who are now, media personalities who do discuss, sport. And Robbie Savage He's not everyone's cup of tea, but he goes to Freddie Flintoff, can you tell if a ball's been tampered with? And Freddie Flintoff goes, yeah, the whole team would have had to have known. The fact that they're claiming only a couple of players are involved is horseshit. He swears and they have to edit it for the broadcast. But Robbie Savage goes, can you tell when something's been tampered with, like the ball or a bat or the wicket? He goes, yeah, you can tell. You can tell. And that debunks the Australian claim that only a couple of players within the playing group were aware. It completely debunks that. And therefore, you have to go, well, was there outside interference saying a ball change will happen early because of a damaged ball? You can bet on that. That's the thing. You can spot bet on anything. You can bet on how many red and yellow cards, how many corners, how many free kicks, how many penalties. You can bet on rugby how many penalties, free kicks, infringements, scrums, scrum resets, missed touches, line outs, tries, penalties. You can bet on anything. If you were to go on to a Bet365, and I'm going to drop a company name in there, even though I'm not a gambler anymore. If you were to go on any betting website or go down to any betting shop when they are open, you can have bets on how many players will be yellow carded in a game. You can have a bet on a scoreline, a 7-1, with a certain team scoring their only goal on or after 80 minutes. In match betting, I don't like it. I think you should place your bet before the game kicks off, and then get your winnings or your losses afterwards. If you were to say there's going to be a minimum of 4 goals, and there's 5, but you said there's a minimum of 4, that's a fair bet. But if you're going to say there's definitely going to be 5 goals in this game, and it's going to be a 3-2, and the winner's going to be scored on 95 minutes in extra time, and there's a lot of people suddenly betting on that, and that's the result, that's a suspicious betting pattern. But there are these red flags in place, and the authorities of various sports, snooker, football, rugby union, rugby league, guys, you name all the professional sports, there is a code of conduct, and the betting companies will say, we've got some red flags on this match. And there was, I think, a game in Sweden, ice hockey, where there were red flags raised about suspicious betting patterns on Swedish ice hockey. And it was earlier this season. So before the NHL restarted, there were some suspicious betting patterns on a ice hockey match in Sweden before the match was played, and the match got cancelled. The Swedish Ice Hockey Federation and the league governing body were informed of these really suspicious betting patterns. The game, got cancelled. And yeah, there are issues in play. Now, some sports are better protected than others, but I'm going back to this point where Australia is the only country that has a dedicated police unit in the federal police that deal with this sort of crime and deal with these issues. And it's interesting, the FBI do go to the Australian Federal Police for advice when they are investigating suspected illegal gambling to do with sports, match fixing and spot fixing to do with sports. When they caught that NBA ref in 2008, they went to the Australian Federal Police for advice. When the England-Pakistan incident and the test series took place, the investigators were already on the phone when allegations were being made to the Australian Federal Police, because there's a dedicated task force within the Australian Federal Police that deal with this. The fact that so many countries are exposed to this sort of organised crime element is worrying. Now, you or I could get a tip off someone and say, "Oh, this horse is going to win the 3:30 at Exeter," right? And I used to have a little bet on the old ponies. I used to go down to the bookies, and some of my mates would go, "Oh, are you going to the bookies for the Grand National?" I said, "Yeah." So, can you place a bet on a couple of races for me? Absolutely. I would do. What we used to do down in my local pub was we used to club together, and one of us would go down and place the bets for everyone, and we give them all the bet slips. So I'll place a bet for myself on the 3:30 at Exeter. My mate might have the 4 o'clock at Doncaster. The Wetherby, the all weather. There might be a race at 1:30, and they'll go, right, we'll pick a race to bet on. And I would always get betting tips from some of the old boys at the pub when I used to work there and when I used to drink there. Some of the old boys would have the racing post, and they would give, "Oh, here's a tip for this race," and I would go down and place a bet. And generally, they were pretty good at reading the form. There are some people who professionally do that. When someone you don't know starts giving out betting tips, you're like, what? And it comes out, they're obviously trying to get as much interest in this bet that the fixers can get a massive payout, because more people are suddenly, betting on a certain result. And when it comes to financial crime, we only have one police force that deals with financial crimes, and that's the City of Westminster, City of London Police. They're the fraud squad. But they don't have a dedicated task force to sports corruption. They still phone up the Australian Federal Police going, "We have an investigation going. Can you advise us?" Which I find stunning. The amount of money in professional sport that only one country has a dedicated police force. That is absolutely stunning. Um, and that in itself, you know, tells you where Australia knows there's problems and wants to fix problems. Um, Sports corruption and organised crime go hand in hand. It's a soft crime. You don't have to kill anyone for it. Sometimes you do, but generally speaking, you just go to the player, a few threats. They generally do what they're told. They take the money. But there are some performances where, yeah, the guy in the InBet, the guy on the TV program, yeah, he did go, "I'm going to get banned for this. I'm a professional gambler. I've made my career out of this. I could retire, but I keep doing it because I'm good at it." And yeah, he did get banned from gambling. The gambling websites and bookies said, "No, you're no longer, you've exposed the secrets." Well, the betting companies are heavily regulated. In order to operate, you have to get a gambling license. Heavily regulated. And they have a warning system in place when there are suspicious betting patterns above the norm. So let's say there's the Ireland France game today, which kicks off in a couple of hours, and we're going to say France are going to thump the Irish 50 points to 10, which is kind of plausible anyway, looking at the form and how they played last week, and the players the French have and the players the Irish have. But let's say every scoreline could be predicted. It could be a very close 9-3, a lot of penalties, for example. I've seen games like that where it's finished 9-6. I actually have seen a Six Nations match where the final score was 9-6. There was 5 penalties, all were kicked, and it was a slogfest of poor weather conditions, poor pitch, and it was just a general slogfest. It happens. You sometimes get the weather conditions will affect the game. It's fine. But you could have every outcome: a draw, a win, a loss, whatever. But then suddenly there's a huge surge for the let's say 35-10, right? 35-10 is the scoreline. Everyone's, putting money on. Let's say one of the French players, Teddy Thomas, he gets a hat trick, and there's a huge surge for those two kind of bets. That scoreline and Teddy Thomas are getting a hat trick, whereas all the other options of a massive blowout score or a very tight game, it's all evenly spread, and there's a massive spike just before the game on a 35-10. The betting companies may raise red flags. Now, let's say the game finishes 30 points to 10. It's close, but it hasn't quite come off. But if it dead on finish 35-10, the betting companies have raised flags. The organisers of the tournament, the two federations involved, the two unions will be the Irish and the French union, have phone calls, and then the various police forces are contacted. And if Teddy Thomas doesn't get a hat trick in that, then okay, they go, right, it is, what it is, it's a fluke. But if Teddy Thomas gets a hat trick in that, and it's 35-10, and all the side bets where there's a yellow card, the amount of penalties, the exact number of scrums, the exact number of lineouts, the exact number of free kicks all come to pass, and they all come together on that 35-10. There's 10 scrums, there's 5 lineouts. I'm using random numbers here, but you know what I mean. Ireland have 2 yellow cards, and all those side bets, those spot bets, come in to match with the scoreline. Then you have a fix. It's highly obvious. The evidence is there. If all the other side bets come through, but Teddy Thomas, let's say, gets a hat trick and it's 15-5 because the goal kicking was shocking that day because the conditions don't ease themselves, but Teddy Thomas gets his hat trick, but it's 15-5 rather than 35 or 30 points to 10. And some of the other side bets don't come off, then yeah, there's a bit of suspicion there. But it's when the red flags all come up and suspicious betting patterns just before kickoff, that's going to be the final score. And these are all the side bets that are going to come in, and they all come in. You've got to fix. Either the referee's been fiddled with, more likely, because he's the one who's got to give the penalties and the free kicks and that kind of thing. Yeah, there's the car counting. I used to play in a poker league. I used to be a professional poker player for a brief 6 months. That was my employment. I'm not joking. I was a professional poker player. I really was. Wasn't very well. I was decent, but I missed on a qualification for a televised tournament by two. It was a league system. More, yeah. There are card counters. I can count cards. It takes practice, but you can count cards. especially if you are playing in a proper poker tournament where you have a dealer. You can count cards. It is a skill, but it's taking away the game of chance and a whole host of other things. And there's a reason why professional poker is less on the TV now than what it was a decade ago. There's reasons for that. But yes, there are people who are professional card counters and they get banned from casinos. And then they teach the casinos how to watch people trying to fix, trying to fix the deck and trying to fix, gambling fixing. The casinos now are so regulated that when you're doing insider trading, yeah, some of these professional cheats have now been hired by the casinos to spot other people defrauding the casino of their money. There are people who professionally watch the poker machines, hawks. Some of these, same with cyber hackers, they're now employed by the security firms to teach the security firms how to make their firewalls better. Sometimes you have to go to the enemy to get a solution. And as long as you pay them the right money, they'll work for you. Some of these ex-hackers have basically said, look, I will help work with the FBI or work with GCHQ because, to be fair, I can help you guys. Same with Michael Francesi. If he came out and said, look, there's a way you can stop this kind of crime. Here's what you've got to spot. And the FBI, I think he must have cut a deal with the FBI and the federal prosecutor because he only got 15 years in prison where some of his co-conspirators have never come out. He said, I'll work with you guys. He wrote books. He's done public speaking. How to avoid getting into crime. He's now an advisor for the government. It's just the betting companies are going, well, you used to run an illegal bookmaking racket. It's like, yeah, this is how you need to regulate it. This is what you need to spot when you have a suspicious betting patterns. If you talk to the right people, they may have been the criminals in the past. They're the ones, sometimes the best ones to say, well, this is how you've got to fix the system. And this is where I think cricket has a massive problem. At the domestic level, players aren't paid a lot. There's not a lot of players on centralised contracts. The money isn't there. And cricket is highly exposed. And yes, you say you don't have to kill anyone, but it's killed my love of the sport. I agree with that. I do agree that cricket has so many allegations against it that you have to question some of the results. Pakistan, especially, with some of their runouts in one-day cricket are ridiculous. And T20, some of the runouts that the Pakistanis have on a regular basis does make you question. These are test players. These are first-class players. You shouldn't be getting run out that regularly. Runouts happen. They do. Missed calls happen when you've got a new player on the side and you're not used to that batting part. It happens. But Pakistan have so many, you're scratching your head. I've watched Catch Me If You Can. He now works for the US government. He basically showed him how you can be a fraudster, and he worked out that he's going to spend the rest of his life in prison, or he works for the US government and cuts a deal. Said, well, I'll serve some time. You guys employ me, and I'll show you how to catch fraudsters like me, who are doing much bigger things. He just became famous because he taunted the FBI for so long. There are others who just are very, very good. And he's saying, look, the reason why you caught me is, I ran out of luck. But the systems that were in place were too weak that allowed that kind of exposure to fraud. Let me help you. Pay me a salary, because he will never be able to get a job post-prison because of his convictions. Pay me a salary, I'll work for you. Catch Me If You Can is based on a true story. There's loads of others. I mean, I love my films that are based on real fact. I'm not a fan of the film itself, because I'm not really a fan of DiCaprio or Tom Hanks per se. But I have to admit, it was almost true to character. They literally spoke to him. They spoke to the various agents trying to catch him, and he was like, "Yeah, no, you can do anything. If the system is weak and there is holes in it, it's easy to exploit." And while I could do a whole video series on sports corruption, I'd rather talk about the positives. I'd rather talk about matches that I've seen and some superstar players and some of the funny bad seasons that teams have had where they've just lost terribly or they've won really well. And can Sheffield United do this great escape? The story beforehand is basically what happens in the film. They do dramatise a few bits for Hollywood, but basically he was a fraudster who he could impersonate people and just get jobs by stealing people's details, and basically it's just a common fraud story. But because of him, the federal government in the US and other countries have actually strengthened their fraud laws. They've covered loopholes. They've made sure the regulations are better. And he still advises in an official capacity today. Absolutely. Michael Francesi, he's got jobs where he advises local authorities and police forces and governments on again regulation. Now, netball, yes, I know it's restarted, but netball and basketball are two sports again that are exposed to corruption. The NBA betting scandal, which involved referees. Now, only one referee was punished. I forget his name. It's pretty frustrating because he's really famous now. He wrote a book and he exposed a lot of the bad things, and the NBA tried to shut him down. They tried to shut him up. They said, "No, there's no problem here," when there clearly was. Same in baseball. Baseball has an issue, obviously, in recovering from the steroid scandal, the Astros buzzers, the sign stealing. Certain sports are more exposed to corruption, and then the less physical, the team sports or the individual sports that don't involve physicality, apart from boxing and martial arts. Team sports are exposed, but it's the less physical one. So football, I think, is the contact sport that is exposed the most to match fixing. American football and Canadian football. So the NFL and CFL are also exposed as well, especially the CFL, simply because of the lack of money in the sport. A lot of players don't get paid a lot. They have to take second jobs. So that is a concern. Cricket, another team sport, where you just need a couple of bad actors and you can spot fix them over. And that could actually alter the result of the match. So when the Australian ball tampering came out, I mentioned there could be match fixing involved or spot fixing involved in it. It has to be in your mind. I wouldn't say all British, but I mean there are certain sports that just don't get the interest of bettors because they don't have that exposure globally. It's the global sports. It is the big team sports that have big TV deals, but the average salaries are skewed by the big name players. But those on lower salaries are exposed. So you could argue. I've never seen. I mean, I personally never seen. I've seen some what I call collapses in team sports. I mean, I was watching an ice hockey match where my team were winning 4-1 and they lost 6-4, and they had a 7-minute period where every shot went in against them and they lost the game. I've seen that. I'm not denying that it doesn't happen. I think it was Bracknell Swindon a couple of years ago. Me and my mate Sam were watching the game and we watched in like, what's going on? Seriously? We've blown that? Really? And that's like the lower professional, semi-pro level. And I'm like, okay, I wouldn't have thought that would be possible. So I have seen some really bizarre outcomes. And you could argue the miracle of Istanbul between Liverpool and AC Milan. Oh God, yeah, you can. That was at the time of the match fixing scandal in Italy, and AC Milan were one of the clubs that were implicated. But why would you throw a match where you can win and re-enter the competition the next year, even with your league form being shit? Liverpool, they were 3-0 down. They get it back 3-0 and they win on penalties. They are now looking at it, question marks in my mind how AC Milan just collapsed in the second half. I remember, I think it was Catalan Dragons. I forget who they were playing in the Challenge Cup. I think it was the semi-final with the 2007 when they went to the final and then lost. They were getting hammered at halftime. They were like 30 odd points down. They end up winning the game by like 3 points. And the opposition had a massive, massive collapse in the second half. It has happened. So there are a couple of results that I do question. There are some that are generally just comeback stories where the team just has that roasting at half time and they come back and they just blitz it. But then there's other ones where you're looking at it going, this result's a bit odd. You can see that team because Catalan were trying in that game. They just were hopeless in the first half. Their handling skills were all wrong, and the penalty count was too high. And you can tell that they were started slowly and were being beaten by the better side. The second half, they just woke up and they were like, "No, we're not going to. We've got some pride to play for. Let's just get the first score." And then they suddenly started getting on a roll, and the other team just couldn't defend. Their defensive, went to pieces, and they were starting to knock on the ball and give away penalties. And you're thinking, okay, swings and roundabouts, but there are some games mid-season, midweek game. It's a cold, wet night. Football, rugby union, and there are some like, what happened there? Because I look at the form book, and there are some things that, but these matches aren't under investigation. This is what I'm saying. It's where the red flags come up with suspicious betting patterns. And this is where the red flags came up with the Trippier and the Sturridge, and there were red flags being, raised about the fact that, the transfers where they were going. The betting companies are so heavily regulated, as I say, in countries where it's legal, so in countries where it's illegal, that they can't bet on their domestic leagues, and then you see lots of suspicious betting patterns occurring in legalized jurisdictions from overseas players. Because what I say when I say overseas players, gambling wise. So yeah, I know there's a lot of criticism of the cricket right now. I haven't watched any of the India-England Test series because I don't have a TV at the moment, because I don't have a working satellite or aerial, because there's issues with the building I'm in. A lot of people don't have a plugged-in TV; they just do it online. And I have heard criticism of the Test series, but I haven't been following it for a reason. I'm at work when the matches are being played. By the time I get in, I've missed the day's play. So if it was a domestic Test series, I could back it on Radio 5 Live in the cab if we could get the bloody radio to work and just listen in the background. Bit of background noise is nice because there's no ads on 5 Live, so you could listen to them. But unfortunately, the time of day that I'm working is the Test match has already been played. Or is being played. It's an interesting one. I think cricket is one of those sports that is heavily exposed to. You can bet on a single over, how many no balls, how many wides, how many LBW, how many reviews, how many wickets, and we know how exposed cricket is. The ICC, as I say, do have an anti-corruption unit. It's not very well advertised, and the concerns are that it's underfunded, it's poorly staffed, and it's not strong enough in its remit. And as I say, I'm going to go back to the Hansi Cronje scandal, which rocked cricket. Darling of the game. South Africa's coming post-apartheid. It's a unifying sport for the country. Mixed race team, blacks, whites, coloureds, Asians, whatever. South Africa were on top of the world. One of the best teams at that time. They've been in the wilderness for, because of the apartheid regime for so many years, the rebel tours and all that. They're allowed back into the international test fold. And then suddenly, the darling of the sport, the captain, one of the most recognised superstar players, not just in South Africa, but around the world, if you're a cricket fan, is implicated in a match fixing. He also died suspiciously as well, because eventually, he lied under oath. And there are conspiracy theories surrounding the plane crash that killed him, and issues there, and payoffs and all sorts that don't go away. But yeah, cricket is one of those sports that is heavily exposed to illegal gambling and match fixing. Heavily exposed. I didn't really want to talk about the whole live stream about sports corruption, but it seems to be a theme. Not something I want to talk about, but it's interesting the amount of team sports where there's illegal betting going on, and some interesting refereeing decisions. We're discussing refereeing at the moment with VAR and Mike Dean. Issues there, and ex-referees have said they have been approached before. They have been approached by suspicious men wearing sunglasses with suitcases full of cash. This has happened. Alex Stewart, ex-cricketer, ex-England captain, has been approached. And he turned down the offer. This is right at the end of his career. He's near the end of his career. He's not a test player anymore. He's just playing county. And he was approached. So when you've got high-profile players like Alex Stewart being approached by suspicious men with a boot full of money, oh yeah, trunk full of cash. Just pop the trunk. There's loads of money. Here's £50,000, £60,000. Can you throw a game, or can you spot fix a game? He's a wicket keeper. What's he going to do? Drop a few catches? Yeah. What's he going to do when he's batting? Get LBW on the third ball of the fourth over that he's playing? I mean, you've got to. But therefore, the batsman, the bowler would have to go right. You're going to have to bowl this line of length, and bowling is hit and miss. The only way you can really spot fix bowling is bowling no balls and wides. As Pakistan found out, you can't get away with that when the red flags are raised. So it's a difficult one, but it's there, and there are sports that are heavily exposed to it. And tennis is another sport that Below the top 100, yeah, there is massive issues with corruption. It's been highlighted, it's been exposed. We know about it. Snooker is another one. The massive growth of the sport, especially in Asia, Chinese market. Yeah, there have been some really suspicious results and some high-profile players like Higgins and Maguire. Stephen Lee got done. He got banned for fixing matches and taking bribes and taking dodgy bets. He'll never play ever again. But I've done videos on it, and there are certain sports where it's individual, where it's based on rankings and prize money. Where if you're a mid-level player, could be a world-class player, but you're stuck in the mid-range for whatever reason, and therefore you're getting less prize money, you're going to be tempted to take that suitcase full of cash. Very tempted, and that is a problem. And you notice wherever the Hearns go, and Frank Warren with promoting, especially the Hearns, corruption is never far away. Look at what's happening with boxing right now with the Kinnigan, wherever his name is, this Irish guy who's got links to organised crime. Well, he's a crime boss. Let's not pretend he hasn't got links, because it's unknown fact. With the Kinnigan family and their associates, and what happened in that Dublin hotel 5 years ago in the weigh-in with the shooting, and guess who's involved with the promotion of his fights? Hearn and Warren. I'm just going to put it out there. I'm going to get another drink quickly. I'll be back in a sec. Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm back. But yeah, the links with organised crime and boxing go back decades. But there's been a new expose on Panorama to do with MTK promotions and all this, and what was MGM, the gym in Marbella. The Irish media and the British media are going nuts for it. I should get an advertising thing. Voice is getting a bit croaky. Yeah, boxing is a sport that's well known. Olympic corruption, the IOC. If you go back to the Salt Lake City Olympics, Winter Olympics in 2002, there was a lot of stories that came out of that Olympics. The ice skating, where a female judge on the mixed pairing, the Russians and the Canadians, obviously, we know about that. Now, I watched a documentary on that. Later on, it transpired that one of the judges who was doing scoring had been approached with some money to change the scores. It came out. So Olympic corruption, because Olympic athletes normally get state funding. They're not on a lot of money, apart from sponsorships. They're not necessarily professionals either. They have full-time jobs. So these things aren't just related just to the big professional team sports. But yeah, I mean, a lot of interesting questions. The cricket does raise some head scratches, but India cricket, Pakistan cricket and corruption go hand in hand. The ICC anti-corruption unit has been criticised heavily over the years, and it is interesting that every test and ICC member nation at one-day level has had at least one player at some point implicated or investigated, or member of the board, like the governing body, implicated. This is a known thing. So yeah, a lot of fans are frustrated with the lack of action taken, the lack of long-term action taken, the exposure of the sport to match fixing. A lot of players are frustrated as well, and a lot of players, past and present, have come out and said that I have been approached. Now, it's mostly to do with ex-players saying, "Look, I've been approached. I have concerns," and we know that New Zealand have had a few high-profile players caught out with match fixing allegations as well, and actually been found guilty and all that. I used examples of Cronje and Srisanth because they were found guilty. They were very high profile. They were individuals who obviously, Srisanth was a brilliant fast bowler. He went to prison, banned for life. So yeah, I mean, while I would like to talk about the upcoming AFL and NRL seasons, while I'd like to talk about the Six Nations and the FA Cup and the got an interesting summer of sport coming up. and all that with the Olympics, Rugby World Cup, and the IIHF World Championships now taking place just in Latvia and all that. And there are things to look forward to. At the same time, yes, I've got to try and find the Canadian journalist, because this Canadian journalist is a genius. He went deep undercover for a couple of years in Southeast Asia, and he could have been wiped out, let's just say snuffed out by some rather nasty organised criminals. But then he exposed a whole syndicate of organised crime where it's classed as a soft crime. It really is. In the sense that once you've got the pieces in place to keep fixing matches and to spot fix and bribe officials, and it's in place, until that official, that player, or that coach, or that referee gets caught, you've got a winner. There are certain leagues that are heavily exposed. There are certain sports that are heavily exposed. And the concern is, and this is where a lot of, especially I'm an NHL fan, a lot of hockey fans are concerned with the liberalisation of the gambling laws in the US. And yeah, there's been some interesting results in the NHL in the last couple of seasons since the liberalisation of the gambling rules. And you have to ask the question, how stringent is their anti-corruption protocols? What kind of communication do they have with the various authorities about the red flag system, for example? And the fact that a professional game in Sweden was postponed because of allegations of suspicious betting patterns that came in the day before the match took place says that ice hockey is exposed. And there are one or two matches that I've watched where I'm going, that is a catastrophic collapse from a winning position. I'll be interested. I don't want to question every single match that I've seen, but there were some of those midweek games in the FA Cup where I was scratching my head about how poor Man United and West Ham were, for example. These are two sides that are doing really well in the Premier League. West Ham won 7 out of 9. Man United are on a good run of form as well under Solskjaer. And some of the selections made me scratch my head. And the way the game was played was a head scratcher. It was a very negative game. And it surprised me. The West Ham Man United game did surprise me a little bit. I was not happy with either side's performance. And in my review, I do say this really surprised me how West Ham and Man United played that game. So, interesting one. Under Tuchel, where do I think Chelsea finish? It's going to be interesting. He is known as a very difficult character to work with. He has a very interesting. He uses analytics a lot. He's a number cruncher, which I don't necessarily like in sport. These coaches who have an analytics department and say your pass percentage is this and all that. I think that gets a little bit in depth too much. There's a reason why he lost his job at Dortmund. There's a reason why he lost his job at PSG. He fell out with technical directors, chief scouts, ownership, the board. He is known as a real difficult character to work with. Interesting to see how he fits in at Chelsea, considering the amount of managers they go through, and whether they can make top 4 or not. There are some other teams in and around top 7, top 8 positions that are playing quite well, and there's others that aren't. There are some, Chelsea themselves, whose form has been different this season at times. Liverpool have gone on a crash course in how to lose. Tottenham, they've just completely gone from first to nowhere very, very quickly. Southampton's form has dipped. So there's an opportunity for Tottenham, for Chelsea, to sneak into that top 4. But it all depends on things going forward. He's had a very good start. It's a new voice in the dressing room, but he is a very difficult character to work with. And with how Chelsea operate, with the win now mentality, if he can't get silverware in, I don't know. I'm not sold on him being the right fit for the club. But then again, what manager wants to go to Chelsea? A club legend in Frank Lampard is gone. And he had to deal with the fact there was a transfer embargo. He decided to bring more young players into the side. He looked at some of the veterans and going, I want to build for the future. And he was gone. Yes, form was a bit, not quite right. They have spent a lot of money in the transfer window when they were allowed to start spending money again. Some of their signings haven't worked out. There's a lot of confidence there. and he was thrown under the bus very quickly. And a lot of Chelsea fans weren't happy with that. And you have to admit, other clubs have taken that next step. This is one of the joys of the Premier League. It's a very competitive league to make the European places and then to compete for the title or the titles in the cup competitions. Very competitive league. And he won his last games, which makes me wonder if the decision had been made a couple of weeks before because of quarantine rules, because Tuchel obviously was in PSG manager, was in France, and he's an overseas manager, whether the board had made the decision before the game against Luton, which I think is unfair. I do think that's an unfair thing. Whether Tuchel can get that top four spot and then compete for titles again, I don't know. The way Chelsea are set up with this win now mentality, they can't afford any more negative seasons. But the way they keep, even if you are a successful manager there, you get sacked. It doesn't matter what you do with the team. Conte is a prime example. I felt he was harshly treated. You could argue that every manager is I think, not. It's the win now mentality. I don't know how long that can be sustained by a club. Chelsea, I think, it's starting to wear thin, that style of ownership and that style of get results or you're out. Even if you get results and you win a silverware, you're still out the door. I don't think that helps the player development. I don't think that helps long term. Interesting. People call it for Solskjaer's head within when we went from interim to full time. He's still there. The team doing rather well. Klopp was given time. He's won them some trophies. Yeah, they're having a down season. Injuries are a problem and there is confidence issues. But for people saying, "Oh, sack the manager," I think that's ridiculous. Ferguson didn't have the best of starts with Man United and nearly got sacked multiple times within his first 3 years, and then he went on to dominate the first half of the Premier League era. Look where Man United are now. They've chopped and changed manager multiple times. Hasn't served them well. Husenhardt, there were calls for his head after the Leicester defeat last season, 9-0. He's still there. They're into the quarterfinals of the FA Cup, and they are a dark horse to win the FA Cup. They're a good cup side. They have been hampered by injuries and coronavirus. This season's unprecedented. You have to give managers time to develop their ideas. I mean, Sheffield United haven't reacted by sacking the coach. They're having a very poor season from where they were last year. They haven't reacted going, the coach is out. Eddie Howe survived many calls for his sacking until he finally decided by mutual consent to part ways at the end of last season. Yes, they got relegated and they didn't quite adapt to the resumption of play, but Bournemouth weren't necessarily out of getting out of trouble. They just didn't adapt well to the resumption of play. But they stuck with Eddie Howe for a long time. You've sustained. I don't know how Chelsea go to keep sustaining success if they're chopping and changing managers every 9 to 18 months. That's your average time frame as a Chelsea manager, is a season to 2 seasons. I don't think it's a healthy environment, and if players are going to develop, look how many players they've lost to other clubs who've gone on to have pretty decent careers elsewhere, who've decided, I've had enough of this, I'm out. So you have to question some of the signings, transfer policy, but you have to question the board decisions as well, and the owner. The owner is win now at all costs. And there's only so long you can do that. I look at other leagues where there's been a sustained period of qualifying for playoffs or being in contention, and then it drops off a cliff. And when it happens to Chelsea, it is going to be catastrophic, absolutely catastrophic. When they do finally drop off that cliff, they're in trouble. And Abramovich obviously is open to suggestions to sell the club if the right offer comes along. So it is an interesting one with Chelsea. I'm not saying they won't make top four, but it'll be interesting because of the structure of the season and how this season's been played out with the COVID pandemic. The lack of movement in the transfer window is key. He's got to get the best out of players that are there, senior and younger players, and the signings. It's going to be difficult to offload them. And Chelsea's transfer policy and scouting and the whole club has got a toxic element to it. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. They've won a lot of trophies since Abramovich has owned the club, absolutely. But the lack of consistency with who is on the bench as manager, who is, on the touchline, who's in that dressing room, is a concern long term. There's only so long you can chop and change managers and continue to be successful. And Arsenal and Man United stuck with their managers for 2 decades plus. They won a lot of trophies. Even at the end of Wenger's era, when they weren't winning the league, they were still winning FA Cups and still qualifying for Europe. So while Wenger may have lingered on a bit too long, he still brought silverware right at the end of his managerial tenure there. Um, so I just don't know with Chelsea anymore. I'm uncertain how long Tuchel will be manager there as well. You look at his stints at Dortmund and PSG; they were short, sharp, and not very sweet when they ended. Um, yes, he won silverware with both clubs, but they were short and sharp periods. So whether they want an immediate impact with him, I mean, if he wins them the FA Cup and they do well in Europe, and they might snag a European trophy. We'll wait and see what happens. But if they win the FA Cup under him, that's fine. It's what happens next season, and next season is going to be the judge if he can do something next season with the squad he's got, plus add a few additions, freshen up a little bit. It'll be interesting. Yeah, Newcastle have seemed to have touched Mother Earth a little bit in recent weeks, and their form has changed somewhat. Um, Steve Bruce is much maligned, but it's to do with the owner. It's not Steve Bruce's fault. The club is where it's at. Rafa Benitez, one of the best managers in the world, was flogging a dead horse half the time. It's to do with the ownership situation at Newcastle. That the managers aren't given the tools for the job. Mike Ashley, that collapsed takeover deal was a joke. It should have gone through. Personally, my personal opinion. The thing is, while the deal has collapsed, it doesn't mean Amanda Staveley is going away or Peter Kenyon's going away because he's had a couple of deals on the table. Mike Ashley's still actively trying to sell that club to protect his other business interests. Fans want him gone. Mike Ashley wants to flog it. The fact the Premier League blocked the move raises some questions. There's still ongoing things in the background with Newcastle. So I'd be interested to see what happens with Newcastle, because that's something with this channel where I seem to be very popular in Newcastle with Newcastle fans. A, I dislike Mike Ashley, and B, I feel sorry for them with the way the club has been run, the devaluation of the club under Mike Ashley. Oh yeah, it's halved in value in actual terms. It's ridiculous, not real terms, actual terms. From its peak valuation, where it was like one of the top 10 wealthiest clubs in the world, to halving in value and struggling on the field, a couple of relegations in there, back-to-back cup finals in the years before Mike Ashley buys the club, but challenging for the Premier League, challenging in Europe, to being a mid-table club at best, relegation threatened at worst. One season where they, have really challenged the top four. The Alan Pardew, that tells you a lot. And when managers like Pardew and Big Sam, who are heavily criticised, and we can debate their qualities, are saying in interviews after the fact that the way the club is run is like a Mickey Mouse show, Chelsea is just a more successful version of Newcastle. That's my personal opinion on Chelsea. A lot of manager turnover. Really, some seasons they're brilliant, some seasons they're woeful. Question marks over the ownership. The owner saying he's open to possibility to sell the club should the right deal come along, which says to me that there is a deal in the pipeline at some point. So to me, there are several clubs, Newcastle and Chelsea, that ownership is a question mark. And the longer that Abramovich is in charge, how successful will this team be long term? I think that period of win now, I think it's starting to run its course with Chelsea to a certain extent. I think, especially in the men's team, the women's team is different. The women's team are very, very successful because, for reasons, they have that funding, but they are a WSL. But on the men's side of things, has this style of ownership had its day? And in the current climate, with the depressed transfer market and the owner possibly wanting out, how sustainable is it? It'll be interesting to see. It'll be interesting to see how successful Tuchel is and how he works with the scouting department, with the backroom staff, with the club board, because many a manager has fallen afoul of that club board and the owner. So he's a very difficult character. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with Chelsea. Same with Newcastle. I mean, the club's been up for sale now the entire time this channel has been going as a sports channel. Okay, that's 4 years, nearly 5. The club has been up for sale. How many takeover bids have got close? The way the Premier League dragged out the Newcastle takeover deal is a joke. But we'll have to see what happens. I mean, I think the question marks over ownership, the fit and proper persons test, directors test, all these kind of things. Questions have to be asked about club ownership and how transparent the process is, and how football is chasing the money. There's the Super League idea we mentioned earlier, the European Super League. That seems to have died a death very quickly when UEFA and FIFA said, yeah, your players will be banned from international competition. And I do believe that has had an impact. Fans were never really in favour of it. They're like, okay, fine. Well, if those clubs decide to go for that competition, they will be thrown out of the domestic competitions. That was the threat. I do honestly believe the footballing authorities are starting to wake up to fan power, people power. Because if we boycott the product, they're flogging a dead horse. And if the stadiums are empty, it looks really shit for TV. I know we've got obviously the pandemic and fans aren't allowed in attendance, but in regular seasons, the FA has actually been concerned with the FA Cup attendance is falling, especially from the third round. Numbers are down year on year. Rugby League concerned that attendances were falling year on year for the Challenge Cup final. The governing bodies work out that TV deals work best when you have packed stadiums of, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70,000 to sell to the overseas market than fans with signs saying boycott, too much money, greed, killing. That when fans protest and make it very public and they're growing in noise, it makes it harder to sell the product as it's harmonious, it's beautiful, it's benefiting everyone. Governing bodies are very, very aware of PR. You look at Greg Clark stepping down from the FA, he's left a power vacuum there. The Premier League having issues with its chief executive. The fact that the governing bodies of the leagues and the FA have been dragged before the Parliamentary Select Committee and then ripped a brand new one. It's an issue when you're trying to sell a global product. I look at Rugby League and the Todd Greenberg situation this time last year. He was told you're not getting a renewal of your contract. And then pandemic hits and he's given a stay of grace. Oh, bloody filter. And then he's replaced midway through the pandemic. He basically goes before he's pushed, basically. The NRL product since he's gone is so much better. So much better. I mean, I've started obviously redoing my preview videos. I've got 4 clubs left to do, and I think there's one club that I really want to delve into in my NRL season previews because of some of the NRL's policies that are in place that were under the Todd Green. And fans have responded positively to Todd Greenberg going. He'd lost the respect of the fans, and he lost the clubs, and he lost the players. He lost the people in the organisation that were crucial for him to be successful. It didn't. I look at various sports and going, well, there's a reason why the commission is hated. Now, Gary Bettman in the NHL says this: if I'm not getting booed when I'm handing out the Stanley Cup, I'm not doing my job right. And he's true. He's employed by the league. He's the league's mouthpiece. He can have a certain say on certain decisions and certain concerns that he has with the NHL. He's not the most hated commissioner in sports. You look at Major League Baseball and the NFL; they have far worse commissioners than Gary Bettman. So the head of the sport, basically the public face of the administration of a sport and a league. The FA and UEFA and FIFA and the footballing federations have a massive problem. They do. The football associations around the world and the governing bodies around the world, when it comes to regional, so in our case UEFA, and international FIFA, have a massive problem with the face of their organisations. They're predominantly male, predominantly middle-aged, and depending where they are, they're either black or white, but depending on background. And a lot of them haven't actually played professionally. Now, Michel Platini was a breath of fresh air when he came along. He's also a crook. But that's another thing with Platini and his corruption. But a lot of people in high office in professional sport have never actually played the sport that they're governing. Rugby union seems to be different. It has a lot of ex-players involved in the administration. Bill Beaumont, well, we can criticise some of his plans for World Rugby, and Augustine Pichot, who ran against him, are ex-players. They've played at the highest level. They've captained their countries. They've appeared in World Cups and various things, and they've played at the highest level in the professional and amateur eras. Now, we can argue that some of the proposals that Augustine Pichot was proposing were not necessarily to the benefit of everyone, and we can argue some of the proposals that Bill Beaumont and some of his governments has not been the best for the whole game as a whole. But you've got ex-players involved in administration, which I think is crucial. Doesn't matter if they're at the highest level, but they have to be involved in the governance of the sport because they can give a player's feedback. They can give feedback on certain rules. They can give feedback on certain issues that the players face. When it comes to sports administration, there's a lack of ex-sportsmen and women involved in administering those sports in an official capacity. And this is where professional football, or soccer if you live in like North America, Australia or New Zealand, falls down massively. There's a lack of ex-players involved with the day-to-day running of the game. Yes, Man City are on top. That's another club that I have question marks over some of their integrity with some of the ownership and some of the issues there. And they're at war with UEFA, and they have been for donkeys. I'm not a fan of City necessarily. I don't hate individual players or clubs or fan bases. I just certain things about certain clubs. Like there's an element there that I don't like. And City's one of those interesting ones where money doesn't automatically buy you success. It took them a long time from the takeover to win their first Premier League title and their first trophies. A good 5-6 years. Chelsea were pretty much off the bat under Abramovich. Took about a season or so to win their first silverware. Man City took a lot longer. There was a lot more missteps on the way. Oh yes, the NRL. Yes, we can discuss the NRL. I'm going to be doing the Roosters and the Rabbitohs, the Dragons and the West Tigers. They're the 4 previews left. I've done Penrith today. I've done Parramatta today. I thought, well, because all these other sports, things like the FA Cup and Six Nations and the NHL resume, I would focus on other sports, get that a little bit of a break. Now that the trial games and the pre-season is really getting underway, and we've obviously got the Indigenous All-Stars game taking place soon, that gives me something to look at. And there's a few clubs left. Now, I also left it because I said there will be players moving clubs. Josh Mansell moving from Penrith to South Sydney sort of gave me the idea I better start finishing off the previews before the season actually starts because there's going to be some more player movement. Now, on the Roosters side of things, Nick Politis, Uncle Nick, how they keep staying under the cap is a head scratcher for me, but it is well known that players are willing to take a hometown discount to play there. Players at the Roosters are willing to take less money to play at Sydney Roosters or Easts. If you want to be historical and hardcore and one of them. Other clubs, such as Parramatta, the Bulldogs, the Storm, the Warriors got caught out once as well. Other clubs, Manly, either they've got smaller fan bases, or in the Storm's case, they're an expansion team. They're in an unnatural rugby league location. They're in AFL territory. You need to attract players. You need to try and grow your fan base. You need to obviously expand your reach. And the Storm one I've covered, and that leaves a bitter taste in a rugby league fan's mouth. But it is known at the Roosters that there's a reason why they're successful. Players will take a reduced discount to play there. They'll take less money. We're talking about maybe $100,000, but they will take that less money because they know the team is successful. They're willing to take that little bit less to buy in, and then they make up their money with the third-party payments. That's all official. Yes, the issue of a boycott, and I will discuss that in their preview video, which is, I think, the second last video I'll be doing, because I'm doing it in alphabetical order. So South Sydney are next, and we can discuss the Sam Burgess situation. The Corden situation, well, that's an interesting one. That is a very interesting one. He's had a lot of head knocks. I was discussing this in my rugby union review of the Wales game with Halfpenny. If you follow rugby union, he's had a lot of concussions and he failed the protocol, rightly so. If he returned to play in that game, I will be like scratching my head. I think Boyd Cordner is an interesting one. Very interesting. He's not the only player to have these concerns about concussions and all that. And the Sawali situation with South Sydney and the Roosters and all that, that is an interesting one. They want special dispensation for him to play when he's 17. Now, I'm not saying he shouldn't, but in that case, if they're going to ask that, then the other 15 clubs also have a right to sign him. They want to have dispensation for him to be available. All the other clubs have to be able to sign him. And then all the other clubs may say, well, we've got a young talent of a similar age. If you're going to give dispensation for this club, we should have dispensation to have at least one 17-year-old who we think is a talent to be on our elite roster, including in the training roster. They don't. They don't. They have a stack squad. So do the Rabbitohs, and in that case, the other 15 clubs have a right to offer him a contract. If they're going to say we want dispensation, the other clubs have a right to then ask for the same dispensation for their up and coming talent. And they do have Tedesco, and the problem is with having Tedesco, they've lost Latrell Mitchell. Now, I personally think Latrell Mitchell is a centre myself. Um, I think left centre is his best position when he was playing at the Roosters. He was better there than at fullback, and he's also at South Sydney as well. When he plays at left centre, when he's chosen to play there rather than fullback, he's a better player. But that's again personal opinion on that. At the same time, if they get this special dispensation, the other 15 clubs should have a right to sign this player, right? If he decides I don't want to play for the Roosters, or B, they also can ask for dispensation for their own talent pool. Say that we've got a 17-year-old or a couple of 17-year-olds who we think are ready. You give them dispensation to the big book, the Roosters. Gold Coast Titans, they go, well, we've got the 17-year-old who's really shone in training where he's been invited to the senior squad to train in the off season. He's really impressed us. We want to have him in the side. I think that in itself is a question mark, but I've got 4 clubs to preview. The Dragons is going to be the fun one for me because they've got so many issues with that club, and I think they are going to be wooden spoonish along with other people. But yeah, if they get the Suwali situation, I mean, the Souths were obviously trying to offer him this big contract, and they had and then Rugby Union came along, and AFL were in the wings as well, going, well, this guy is a talent. I don't know. I haven't got to the Dragons yet. I know McInnes is out for the season. He was going to leave anyway for the Sharks next year anyway, so he can heal himself. Ben Hunt's better as a hooker than a half. They have a more balanced attack when he plays hooker. He doesn't want to play there because of Origin and international selection. Fair enough, but his best position is hooker. He's proven that at Origin, international, and at club level. The Dragons also have the problem of being a dual venture, much like West Tigers, where there's too much infighting at board level, where it doesn't help. And they're much more pronounced with the infighting at board level than the West Tigers. The West Tigers seem to be sorting things out financially and off the field. On the field, they still suck, but they're getting there. But please wait for the previews. I don't want to spoil the previews now because things can still happen within now doing this live stream and me doing the other 4 previews this evening, my time. So tomorrow, your time, if you're in Australia. More news may come out of various clubs overnight and into tomorrow. The McKinney situation here is a blow for the Dragons. He's clearly their leader. He's clearly one of their better players. He's a heart and soul guy, but he didn't want to stay there. They knew he was going at the end of this season, so that now gives them the hurry up to get another hooker. There is still time for them to offer a contract to someone or promote someone from their development squad into the role to cover Ben Hunt, because I don't know what Ben Hunt is. Is he a halfback? Is he a hooker? Can he play fullback? I mean, West Tigers are not the Dragons, sorry, are a club in crisis. And I haven't even mentioned the Jack de Belin situation because he's still technically on their books. The no fault, no stand down policy, which is a Greenberg policy that he brought in, which doesn't actually help anyone. The Dragons have a problem where they've got a player who is still suspended. His court date is constantly being pushed back. He was already going to be put on trial 2 years ago, and that keeps getting delayed. And now there's issues with a key witness, and now there's issues with the jury, and it's just a mess. Either he plays again or he doesn't. I don't think he does. And secondly, having that hang over a couple of 3 years. Yeah, 3 years the Jack de Belin saga has been carrying on. And I will mention it in the preview, and I hope people comment on it, because whether he's found guilty or not, I don't think he plays again. I think, he's been going to training. That's it. That's all he can do. He goes to the weight room. He's at the training ground, can't play. And they don't get any cap relief for it either. As far as I know there's some issues about the cap situation with the Dragons, with the de Belin situation. And I understand that he hasn't been found guilty of an offence yet. But then I look at how they've dealt with other players with misdeeds, such as Ben Barber. He was never charged with anything, thrown into the wilderness. But then Ben Barber has a lot of off-field incidents with drugs and alcohol and domestic violence allegations. Greg Inglis, his drink drive conviction. We know with Greg Inglis there were mitigating circumstances with mental health issues and alcoholism, and that is a well-known, obviously, fact. Um, but then I look at some other players. I'm thinking, why is Jack Bone still under contract and Ben Barber thrown under the bus? This is a question I legitimately ask about how the NRL deals with certain individuals. Um, the Bennett situation has not helped the Dragons at all. It hasn't, and the boardroom infighting as well, because it's a dual venture. I don't like that. I don't like how the NRL rationalised itself after the Super League war. I know that. I mean, I did my video on the Western Suburb Magpies been utterly woeful the last 2 seasons, but they couldn't financially compete because of what the Super League war brought in: higher wages for players. They just couldn't retain the talent, but they had to meet the cap floor, and so they were fielding players who would be normally in reserve grade or regional clubs, and they just got battered. And their best players left for other clubs, and then the Balmain Tigers were like, "Look, we've also got some money issues. We're a better team. Let's combine together." And then you look at that first West Tigers team; the majority were Balmain players. On the Debenham situation, I don't know the full ins and outs of it. I've read up a bit. I know that it's still ongoing. He's still suspended. I don't think he plays again, be it with the Dragons or another club. Me, I'm a Raiders fan. From his sins, I like Sticky. I like Ricky. I like what he's done there, and the way he's handled players, and the whole junior match with the 4 players getting basically sacked by the club, and Haiweranara and Corey Horsbrook getting dropped because of their DUIs. He's making a point, the public image of this sport, stop misbehaving. Ricky Stewart, I think, and the club, Canberra don't really hold any bars for players who are arseholes. And Ricky Stewart is a hard taskmaster, but in real life, away from the field, he's a top bloke. The way he's come up very quickly and dealt with Haiweranara and Horsbrook, saying you dropped to reserve squad because of their DUIs. He's punishing them. They will come back into the side. I'm not going to say they're going to have their contracts terminated. They haven't. The 4 junior players who got involved in a bar brawl, A, they shouldn't be drinking anyway. B, 3 of them were idiots. 1 got glassed and actually admitted. 3 of them lied about being in the fight. Again, he's saying we don't tolerate this. This is not what we tolerate at Canberra. Whether it hurts the team this season or not, I don't care. I like someone who has principles. And Ricky Stewart is very outspoken on a lot of things. And if you look at his interviews during the pause, when League Live was on Fox and all that, he was very keen to, he embraced the rule change and said it had to happen. We need to leave our personal opinions to the side when it comes to coaches wanting to, coach the wrong way, get the wrestle out of the game. Because I can see Ricky Stewart going, when he decides to pack in coaching, I can see him being a commentator or an expert saying that this is a problem. He's admitted it's a problem. He doesn't like it in the game. Other clubs seem to want to have the wrestle, and Ricky Stewart being a bit outspoken at times. But I like the way he's outspoken, and he talks the truth. He's not everyone's cup of tea. I get that. Ricky Stewart's not everyone's cup of tea, but he does have some valid points. On the stupid players ruining the game, I mean, every off-season, look at this off-season, 2 DUIs for the Raiders and 4 junior players involved in the bar brawl. I'm sorry, that's just really bad. When you're trying to sell the product overseas, this is where the AFL have been doing it better with the North American market. And I like the AFL, don't get me wrong, I love the AFL. I haven't got a team in the AFL that I follow, really, but I like watching AFL every now and then. I will watch a game casually. I'm not as hardcore fan as I used to be, the AFL. But the AFL seems to have less off-season drama than the NRL. Now, the Collingwood Magpies, obviously, with their report into institutionalised racism is one thing, and an ex-player who was a prickly character anyway, but he has said, look, this is what's happened. And the club have admitted that. Is interesting. But the AFL seems to have less off-season drama and less high-profile cases of misbehaviour. I mean, Ben Cousins is obviously the big, well-known tale with the AFL. But the NRL, it doesn't matter if you're a star player or just a grunt in the side, your average, forward, he just, does his job or whatever. There's so many players and administrators and every off season, it's like, what scandal are we going to get this year? It's a general thing. I have no other way to describe what the NRL keeps shooting itself in the foot. And Paul Kent, love him or hate him, I like a bit of Kenty. He does say that the game's capacity for self harm is unbelievable. Every season we have allegations of steroids or the whole peptide scandal, which also actually dragged in the AFL, which stained the AFL with Essendon and all that, and other clubs as well, individual players. The amount of players every off-season misbehaving is ridiculous. Payne Haas this last off-season with Brisbane. Pangai Jr. with what happened last season. I look at it, and then the Bulldogs with Ockenbaugh and Haiwiranara. It's just, it doesn't help sell the product overseas. It doesn't. And the AFL seems to have a better handle on the situation. Still has scandal, just nowhere on the same level as the NRL. And then in the NFL in North America, it's an everyday occurrence that players are misbehaving and doing stuff. Same with what European football, what you would call soccer. We have players misbehaving all the time, especially during the lockdown, first lockdown back in March to May. The amount of high-profile football players in the UK who were just flouting the rules. And if you watch enough of my videos, you'll know that I target a few players because they keep just giving me ammunition to go, you're a dickhead. It doesn't do a lot, and it does damage public opinion when you're trying to get government funding or you're trying to get the game back up and running and try and get fans on side. If you're losing the fan base going, these players are keep misbehaving, we're making sacrifices, they're not willing to take pay cuts, they're not willing to take pay deferrals, and you're thinking to yourself, how out of touch is this sport? But no, the NRL, it's every off season. I've stopped reporting on individual players' misdeeds and what they're doing. I didn't do any videos on Payne Haas at all with his legal troubles. I didn't do any videos on Haiwiranara or Corey Horsbrook with their DUIs because it's so negative. It doesn't help. It especially when it's happened to my club, the team that I support, where 4 junior players have been basically sacked and 2 senior players have been dropped from the main squad to start the season. It shames the game, and that's just one club. We're not even in Brisbane have had yet another off-season of off-field dramas where players are misbehaving. I mean, Fafita, when he was there, when he got arrested in Bali, it's constant. Now, Ricky Stewart, I respect what he's done. I do respect what he's done, and taking a very quick response saying, this is not acceptable in this organisation. You are accountable for your actions and you have to take the consequences. At other clubs, it seems to be, well, Haiwiranara is a senior player and Horsbrook is a seasoned player now. He's played a couple of seasons, but it's not good enough. But it seems the NRL itself and the integrity in it is toothless. Now, a lot of that's to do with the Todd Greenberg era. Andrew Abdo and Peter V'landys have really turned the ship around in the last 10 months. I'm going to give them credit for that. And you have to ask about the culture of the sport. Now, I used to drink heavily. I'm not going to deny that I was a bit of a pisshead, but see, soft drink, important. It is only 1:15 here in the afternoon, so I'm not going to be on the piss. This is my day off from work. But it does raise concerns about the culture within dressing rooms, the attitudes of clubs, and the same goes for the AFL because the Ben Cousins situation. He wasn't the only player abusing recreational drugs and drink problems. He was just the high-profile one the league wanted to catch. There's still issues there, and it's the same in rugby union. Especially in the Northern Hemisphere, the scandal, and Australia and England are the 2 most high-profile teams which have had off-field indiscretions. I think France a couple of years ago, where players were thrown out the squad for basically getting into trouble after a match in Scotland against in Edinburgh against Scotland in the Six Nations a couple of years ago. So it still happens. When you say Storm is a well-behaved club, you say that, but then the salary cap scandal, when the players were willingly knowing what they were doing, and the second and cooking the books and all that. Um, they seem to have a lid on negative headlines. Now, whether that's a very closed in-house shop is another thing. It'll be interesting to see ex-Storm players who are playing elsewhere, what their views are when they were at the Storm and what the culture was like. Cameron Smith isn't as well liked as people think he is. You look at the incident with Cooper Cronk and Cameron Smith in the grand final, where Cooper Cronk is basically wanting to rip his head off. I don't think they're the best of friends somehow. Great with as a combination of Queensland, Australia, and the Storm. But I don't think Cooper Cronk was necessarily as fond of Cameron Smith as is led to believe. When you listen to Cooper Cronk when he's you know working for Fox, uh, he doesn't use a nickname for Cameron Smith. It's his full name. He doesn't seem to come across as matey as I would say. I don't think there's a lot of love lost there. It'll be interesting to see what comes out with the Storm in years to come with players when they talk about their time there, when they've retired, and certain figures within the club have moved on. It'll be very interesting. I don't think they're as squeaky clean, apart from the salary cap scandal, as they claim to be. Because there are players who've played there, who've gone on elsewhere and then been caught out for indiscretions. I think it's a very closed shop with Melbourne. I really do. I think the same things happen at Melbourne that have happened at other clubs. They're just very, very good at keeping it hush hush. Partly because they play in the AFL city of Melbourne, where when players fuck about, it's the AFL doing it, and therefore they can seem to go under the radar. But if they were, let's say, a Queensland or New South Wales club, I think it'd be harder to keep hush hush with the local media. I think they're lucky. I like Cooper Cronk. I do. He comes across as pretty good in interviews, and you listen to him talk. He's very analytical about the game. I think he comes across all right. I think it's an interesting one. Everyone's got their opinion. I'm not a fan of Cameron Smith, the person. As a player, his record can't be denied. But the salary cap scandal and certain things since then, with the diamond ring and the way he seems very matey with certain things and some of his rugby tactics, I think Cronk comes across as a better character than Smith. He's less hated than Cameron Smith. And that tells you something when he was playing for that Storm side. People don't dislike Cronk as much. And it will be interesting when all said and done, when, the coaching setup changes in a couple of years, or when more players move on and change clubs and retire, what is actually said, what goes on in that dressing room at Melbourne. Because every other club seems to have these high profile indiscretions. I think because they're playing in Melbourne in an AFL market, they can go under the radar with the local media. I do think because you look at players who've gone on from Melbourne to other teams because of salary cap reasons or contract was up and they didn't want to stay there. Greg Inglis, they obviously didn't look after him very well because what happened at South Sydney is he came to light he was struggling with alcohol. He was struggling with his mental health. Oh God! I mean, as a younger player, Smith was more lovable. As time has gone on, there have been question marks about Cameron Smith and his character. But things will come out. They will. When he's retired and moved on from the Storm, and if he decides to play at Gold Coast or Brisbane this season, because he's still technically registered as a Storm player, he hasn't officially announced his retirement. That is something that's very interesting. When he does decide to move on, it will be interesting when, Craig Bellamy, it's his last season as coach, when Bellamy and Smith have moved on from the Storm and the next breed of players comes through. Because bearing in mind, the Bromwich and Proctor got caught with that cocaine incident after the Anzac Day test. So there does tell me that there is a culture there that's on the hush-hush. They were on international duty when they were caught, and they weren't caught by testers. That says to me that there's still something within the club. They were high-profile players that have played for the Storm. Bromwich is still there. Proctor, I think, had gone to Gold Coast at the time. But it does say something about the culture that there is clearly a hush-hush culture. The fact they got away with the salary cap breaches for so long, they're playing in Melbourne, where the AFL is the sport to focus on, and motorsport as well, with the V8 supercars, with the Grand Prix and all that, and the F1, and the tennis. So it's not the main sport in Melbourne. It does seem to go, it does seem to go under the radar a little bit there. because of the market they play in. You could say the same in the NHL. If you follow ice hockey, there are certain locations which are American football or baseball locations where an NHL team is, such as Florida with Miami and Tampa, and Arizona with the Coyotes, and Carolina with the Hurricanes. Non-traditional ice hockey locations, non-traditional markets. And when players seem to misbehave or something happens, it doesn't really get reported by the local media anywhere near as much, get the coverage as much locally that it does north border in Canada, or in the more traditional markets going, well, here's our NHL reporter in this newspaper or this TV channel. So this has happened So I think it's the market they play in. But the Bromwich Proctor situation a couple of years back, they were, that raised some questions for me. It's like they're playing for the Storm. This is the squeaky clean club, remember? It says to me that there is something going on there, that they are a little bit more hush hush. But we'll see what happens. We'll see what comes out. But it was nice to have you on, Carlos. I mean, I'm gonna prepare myself to prep the rest of my NRL season preview videos. I might actually do all of them before the rugby union starts, getting them done. But I know it's late over there, so that means they won't really get the viewership that I want. But I might do them a bit later after the rugby's done, because I obviously got a France Ireland in about an hour and a half's time. And I do think if you put that on record, I will suggest that that's going to be a good game. I think the French are possibly going to rip Ireland to pieces. Ireland have to respond. But it was good having you. There's some really good questions there about the NRL and the AFL and stuff. And it's nice to move away from talking about sports corruption and match fixing. But the AFL has also got some negative headlines in the off season. Nowhere near as much as the NRL. And I think the AFL, they have a much stronger code of conduct. The clubs behave better. But when they do get caught out doing stuff, it's big news. Whereas in the NRL, it's regular player and club misbehaviour. When the AFL do it, it blows up bigger, partly because of the national audience, and partly, because they're playing in every state and territory. Rugby league is a little bit more East Coast, but it's interesting. The AFL's got a better international footprint with TV, with more interest in North America than the NRL, even though the NRL rugby league is played in more countries. But again, that's another topic together. Whether the AFL is actually better behaved or they're less likely to get caught, that's an interesting one. Because when the AFL does have it blow up, the peptide scandal at Essendon, Carlton with the salary cap, Collingwood with the investigation, the internal or external review into institutionalised racist behaviour, Ben Cousins, and there's a few other players who've failed various drug and doping tests and all sorts. But when it does blow up, it has a bigger impact on the sport. The NRL, because every off-season there's negative headlines coming out about so-and-so misbehaving, drink drive conviction, assault, Jack DeBellin, whatever. It happens so regularly that we become immune to it. But when the AFL does screw up, it makes bigger headlines because they rarely have that negative headline coming out. Rugby league, I think, because the NRL came back to play sooner than the AFL and had a longer season than the AFL. They were the first professional sport to resume play globally. The NRL league, they had that head start, and that's key when you've got the casual fan. Let's say you've got someone living in Melbourne who isn't a footy fan, but isn't a rugby league fan, but is a casual sports fan, because Melbourne's one of those global cities. You're going to catch the eye when there's nothing on the TV sports-wise. You're a sports fan. You're going to catch the eye. If you're in Perth, you've got two AFL teams. You've got an A-League team, no rugby league team in the NRL, but you like your rugby league. But you're a casual fan because, the Perth Red Devils have been gone for donkeys, right? They're still playing in, local Western Australian league, but they haven't got an NRL team. There's no matches on the road this year because they always are well sold ticket-wise for the matches on the road in Perth. And Perth is a fast-growing global city as well. That's the only sport on TV. Bang, you're going to watch it. It's going to get your interest in if you've got kids or younger family members. You're going to watch it. So part of that is to do with Volandis and Abdo replacing Greenberg and really transforming the governance of the game and highlighting we've got to speed the game up, we've got to make some rule changes, we've got to improve the product so we can sell it. And secondly, it's the way they got return to play protocols in place. Not a single game was postponed. Not a single game. And they have taken State of Origin to Adelaide and Perth. And the ticket allocations they've had, they've sold out. They sold out State of Origin in Perth. They've sold out State of Origin in Adelaide. I wouldn't say it was underwhelming at the end of the year. I think they had no choice. They had to get State of Origin played because that's a big money maker for the rugby league in Australia, the Rugby League Commission. It makes them a lot of money. Australian the ARL, got it in there. The ARL, it's their money maker. The Queensland and New South Wales state leagues, it makes them money, which they can invest in grassroots footy. Oh, it's weird calling league rugby footy, but I've got used to the Australian terminology now because what I call football is soccer for you guys. So it's difficult. I keep making these fuck ups and videos, really pissing me off because I've got a global audience. But jokes aside, they had no choice. They had to do it. It made sense in the short term. On a longer term thing, it's an idea the NRL are possibly considering on a longer term thing with the clubs, with the regional leagues in Queensland, New South Wales, is possibly reconfiguring the calendar so State of Origin is at the end of the season, or maybe at the beginning of the season. That's something that the NRL is actively considering. I do know that for a fact. Now, for traditionalists, middle of the season, right? You have the bye weeks. That means fringe players can get a chance when the Origin players are backing up and all that and away. And it obviously for traditionalists, but then bring back City Country. Seriously, bring back City Country, not just for New South Wales, but also for Queensland, because the way they left that didn't sit well with me. It's a great way to bring football to the rural communities in New South Wales, and I think they could do it in Queensland as well. Bring back City Country, because it traditionally it was the selector for State of Origin, especially New South Wales with more players. But bring back City Country Origin because it's a stepping stone for State of Origin. That's my personal opinion. It gives a player an experience away from their club dynamic in an Origin camp with players that normally would be your opponent. Sometimes some of your teammates are on the other side. It is a really interesting game, and it brings it to a wider audience. It does. I would say bring it back, but then that's up for the Australian Rugby League Commission to decide to get rid of it, which I think is a mistake. Really do. Especially as rugby league is now apparently growing faster than AFL, Aussie rules. Yeah, I mean, look, I'm British, okay. Rugby league in this country is not in the main sports; it's regional. So obviously, what we call football, what you call soccer, every town, village, and city has at least one club. Okay, I've got mates who play for some of the local non-league teams. My mate's two daughters play for a team 2-3 miles from where I live right now in the girls' structure. I've got a mate who plays at the same women's club. I've got mates who played in another town where I used to live just up the road. So I'm sort of in between several football clubs. I've got mates who played for in the non-league, English football, association football, soccer. There's one, two. The nearest professional club is 13 miles away. We have two of them within the equal radius. We've got Reading and Maidenhead United. One's technically in the National League, which is non-league, but they are professional and they're doing quite well. And the other one is in the Championship, ex-Premier League club. And then you other than that, then you have Rugby Union, and our nearest professional club, technically, I would say would be London Irish or Ealing. I'm in between two. And obviously Ealing are in the Championship and London Irish are in the Gallagher Premiership for the Rugby Union. Then you have a toss-up between cricket, rugby league and ice hockey. Now, ice hockey is played nationally. Oh, yeah, there is no regional divide except at the elite league level where there's fewer teams in the south of England than the north. But that league's been suspended because of the coronavirus pandemic. But the National League is England-wide. And my team play in the National League. Now, our home arena is shut indefinitely. So we've moved up the road to a team in the league below and we're sharing a facility. Now, I've followed some of my... Look at my jersey collection video. We'll see what team I'm talking about when it comes to ice hockey. I've got loads of jerseys. They're all locked away in the cupboard because just to get them out would be a nightmare and go through them would be a nightmare. Rugby league is regional, mostly played in the north of England, Lancashire, Yorkshire. So I do your geography. So Leeds, Bradford, Greater Manchester, bits of Cheshire, so near Cheshire, Warrington. It's played in a very narrow strip of the country. There's a couple of teams down south. I mean, we've got the Broncos and the Scholars in London, and the London Broncos play only up in Ealing, which is not that far from where I live. I mean, to get there is a bit of a pain in the arse. But the London Broncos are a solid side. The issue is they never really had a opponent home, but they share a ground with Ealing, the rugby union club. So we've got two teams in London. We've got a team, I think, we had a team in Hemel Hempstead, which is just north of London. They've gone out of business. There's a team in Swindon that play amateur level, which is down the road from me, about an hour away. We've got a team in Coventry, but mostly it's the industrial north of England. Ironically, Newcastle does not actually have a rugby league team, a rugby union team, not a rugby league team, which is really interesting that the northeast of England doesn't have an imprint there. It's union and what I call football. So that's an interesting dynamic, which I think is holding the sport back. The TV deal isn't great. And I've argued, rather than going to Canada with the Wolfpack and the Ottawa Aces, now the Aces have deferred their entry for a year, and the Wolfpack have been thrown out of the Super League because they didn't resume play. That in itself raises questions about the growth of the game. Lee Centurions, I don't think should have been given that Super League spot. I think it should have been the Broncos or Toulouse who play in France. That's personal opinion. They've got much stronger fan bases, stronger finances, and have got more Super League or experience, as a competitive club in either the old French division, the old French professional league, and they've developed more players. It's personal opinion. The Broncos, I think, were the last Super League team before the Wolfpack. I think they should have been allowed back in because they gave it a good go. They were written off at the start of the season and nearly pulled off the Great Escape. They lost out on points differential by the end, which was a shame. I think they were a game short of staying up because we have promotion relegation, which is a headache for those countries that don't have a promotion relegation system. It's just a European way of doing things. Don't ask. Really don't ask. It's a head scratcher. But what I'm getting at is rugby league is not on the same level as rugby league in Australia. Where in Australia it's the second sport, over here it's fourth or fifth because you've got cricket, ice hockey, and rugby league. And rugby league playing at the same time cricket's playing, you've got to compete with another national sport. Ice hockey is competing against union football, hence why it's the third sport in winter. But you understand what I'm getting at. The issue is they sync the calendars up where we play in our summer, you play in your winter, which I didn't like to begin with, and I still not overly keen on now, but I understand the logic behind it. If you have a mid-season swap of players, for example, a player playing in the NRL or reserve grade wants to come over here, vice versa, I can get that to a certain extent. But a lot of traditions don't like it. It means that some clubs, such as Ealing, for example, who have a union side, have a rugby league side playing, they've had to make it a 3G pitch, so the pitch doesn't fall apart. Wigan, for example, you have Wigan Athletic Football Club play there, and Wigan Warriors play there. So in years past, Wigan, what is now the DW Stadium, what used to be the JJB in Wigan, the pitch was just ripped to pieces, destroyed. It was a horrible playing surface. Just couldn't take the abuse because it's been used 12 months a year solidly. It got absolutely annihilated. And it couldn't take the constant play. Harlequins, who play in the rugby union, were once having a ground share with London Broncos, and again the pitch got destroyed. It just couldn't cope. Rugby union. Look, I'm a fan of the international game in rugby union, the club game in rugby league. Don't get me wrong, I will be watching the Rugby League World Cup. Rugby union is better at international level. Personal opinion, it's much better. The club game has got so many problems at union level. Rugby league, on the other hand, has issues at international level, and that's my personal opinion. I think because you don't have an international governing body with rugby league, it causes problems because the NRL and Super League have different rule sets. Origin has a different rule set. The international game has a different rule. You can still fight in international games. You are aware of that. You just get a 10-minute penalty. You can beat the shit out of each other in an international game, but you can't fight in Origin or domestic leagues anymore. I find that ridiculous. I really do. The only sport that has different rule sets, but basically the game is played the same, as ice hockey. You've got IIHF rules, you have regional variations, and you've got NHL. Yeah. Either way, you can still drop the mitts and beat the shit out of each other. You'll just get a 5-minute penalty or a game misconduct. If it's international, you don't fight in ice hockey, but every other league, yeah, you can beat the crap out of each other. And it's like, 5 minutes. unless you're an instigator, which is 5+10 and plus game. But that's another thing. Third man in, don't do that. Ice hockey's fun though. Hence why I'm wearing ice hockey stuff. But jokes aside, I think on the international side, rugby league has got to play catch up. Whereas football, soccer, remember that, or rugby union have a unified international governing body. Rugby league doesn't, and that is a massive step back. That's what they've got to modernise. They've got to have a global international body where they can, unify the rule set, because the pitches are the same size. They need to unify the rule set because the Super League and NRL have different rule sets. We don't have the 6 again rule in Super League. NRL does. We have a different set on the play the ball rules to the NRL. The NRL had the 2 ref system for the best part of a decade and a bit. We never went that way. So I think that in itself, we need to have a universal rule set. Personal opinion. I say bring back the biff. I say bring back a bit of the knuckle throwing. Personally, it makes it more interesting when you've got 26 men trying to beat the shit out of each other. Because when you see a little halfback like swinging punches against a prop, it makes it interesting because you wouldn't seriously. There's some brave halfbacks out there. I remember cattle dog. Yes, even though I'm in the UK, I've never been to Australia. I remember the cattle dog shout from Tommy Raudonikis and that massive brawl. I used to love State of Origin. I'm also a bit miffed that they've taken the biff out of it. But no, there was some brutal. I mean, I remember Willie Mason. Who did he knock out from GB? Willie Mason, that one punch knockout, and then Peacock comes in, and you've got hands being thrown. Willie Mason against the GB Lions. I think it was in 2006, the last Lions, maybe 2004. And he just knocks the guy clean out one punch, and then Sean Long with his fucking cornrows comes in and he gets battered, and then it just turns into a massive punch up. Adrian Morley, there you go, there's a player who liked a bit of a biff. He got the quickest red card in rugby league. He lasted 3 seconds. He was sent off within 3 seconds. First tackle, he decapitates the guy, red card, done. You couldn't make it up. But yeah, you can still actually, have a biff in international. You can't at club level. Don't get that. In rugby union, you can't throw punches now. You're getting a 6-week ban. I don't like that. I like just let them fight. Christ, let them fight. They're all going to be mates at the end of the game. They're going to have a few beers. Okay, there might be a bit of hatred between certain players who may not like each other, but at the same time, come on, just let them. Ratings go through the roof. You look at some of the classic games they show on rewinds when they go, "Oh, there's no the match has been cancelled because of the weather," for example. We'll show you, the play's been suspended as a delayed kickoff. We're going to show you highlights from the so and so cup final, so and so league game between these two teams, and they whack it on, and then you've got, I think it was it Warrington Widnes, which was classed as World War III back in the 70s or 80s or something. There's about 12 fights. When they're actually playing the game, it's brilliant because there's passing, there's tackling. There's 12 fights. It's just like every ruck and every tackle was a punch up, and it was brilliant viewing because the pitch is just a sea of mud. There is like no clean jerseys on these players, and I think it's Warrington with, and they're beating the shit out of each other. I'm like, this is good. I like this. This is amazing, right? And they're literally hurting each other. They are hurting each other, and I'm thinking, the fans are going nuts for this. The fans are going, it's a sold out crowd. They're going bananas. The commentator's losing his voice. And it's like, what's going on? And they're beating the shit out of each other for 80 minutes. And the clip is about 15 minutes long. It's split first half, second. And they condensed all the fights into 15. I'm thinking to myself, we should have more of this. I like this. Like, yeah, suspend the players afterwards, but let them fight. Let them fight. Just go on just go on YouTube and type in NHL fights and line brawls, and you'll see stuff from the 70s and 80s. They had changed the rule due to, I think it was the Flyers. Was it the Flyers Montreal? I think it was the Flyers Montreal Canadians. It's a playoff game. And the goalies are warming up. The warm up's finished. I think it's the Flyers. It's the Flyers Canadians, and a guy just, starts hitting the puck at the opposition goalie. The Flyers are all in the changing room. Okay, half of them are getting changed, and then it turns into like a 20-minute brawl. I mean, there's the Battle of Quebec in the 80s between what is now the Colorado Avalanche, the Quebec Nordiques, and the Montreal Canadiens, where that playoff series just turns into a fucking bloodbath, and it's just a punch fest. There's the Rangers Bruins brawl where, oh god, I forget his name. He used to be a general manager and he's a commentator, and he climbs into the stand and he beats a guy over the head with a shoe. Um, it's ridiculous. If you notice that on the Adrian Morley hit, it's 3 seconds in. The referee doesn't blow the whistle for a couple of seconds and doesn't technically stop the clock. That's something you got to notice. It's from the first kickoff. He just takes the guy's head off from the first hit up. Quickest sending off in international rugby league, bar none. Not the quickest red card in professional sports where a player has been thrown out of a game and ejected, but it's one of the quickest. And in rugby league, that is the quickest red card ever. Adrian fucking Morley, beast. Possibly the best player. He's played more first grade games than Cameron Smith ever will. Fact, done a video on Adrian Morley. Oh yeah, the Broad Street Bullies. There's a documentary on YouTube, just Broad Street Bullies. Bobby Clark and his grin. Bobby Clark's diabetic, by the way. But then you got the Legion of Doom in the 90s with Lindros. They didn't win a Stanley Cup. Oh my God, they were scary to play against because they could score goals and beat the shit out of you. Ron Hextall, the most penalty minutes for a goaltender. Been out there. Billy Smith is second for the most penalty minutes for a goaltender. Billy Smith was an absolute animal. Check him out. He played for the Islanders in their Stanley Cup winning teams of the early 80s. Check out a player called Tiger Williams. Used to play for Vancouver and Toronto. Absolute beast. Nearly 4,000 penalty minutes. So if you work out 5 minutes for fighting, 2 minutes for a standard penalty. Then you've got game misconduct, which are 10 minutes. And then you've got match misconducts, match penalties, which are another 10 minutes. Work out how many penalties Tiger Williams took and guess how many goals he scored. Oh, yeah. He could score goals. He could also beat the shit out of you. So Tiger Williams, I'm going to have to quickly check how many penalty minutes Tiger Williams actually has, because this is going to be insane. So Tiger Williams holds the record for the most penalty minutes of a player. Okay. And I will compare him to an active NHL player right now. So Tiger Williams. This guy, honestly, seriously, just check out Tiger Williams. So he's 67 years old right now. He was picked 31st overall in 1974. So if that's in today's game, he's going in the first round. So back then, 74, that would have made it, was it 21 teams in the 70s or was it 16? I think it was 16 teams or 17 teams. And I think it was 16 teams in 74. He also was drafted in the WHA as well, 33rd overall. So again, if we're talking about Tiger Williams, let's have a look at his penalty minutes, shall we? Trust me, this is insane. So it's 5 minutes for a fight, 2 minutes for a minor penalty, 5 minutes for a major. Wow. He played from 74 to 88. So that's a 14-year period of beating the crap out of people. Penalty minutes. Career stats. Here we go. Regular season only and playoffs. So regular season only. So we're just talking an 80-odd game schedule, 70 to 84. I think it's 78 to 84 game schedule. So you just work it out roughly. Now it's an 82 game schedule, right? 3,966 penalty minutes. So it's a nice even number. So it means you have a few too many fights. Most NHL penalty minutes career, including the playoffs. So you've got to put the playoffs in here. 4,421. Now, bear in mind, the Maple Leafs and the Canucks, when he was playing for them, were absolutely woeful at the time. They didn't have a lot of playoff games. 4,421 penalty minutes, including playoffs. Okay, so Maple Leaf record. This is insane. 240 playoff penalty minutes for the Maple Leafs. Most penalty minutes in one season by a left winger, 351. Vancouver Canucks records. Most playoff penalty minutes, 181. Now, when he was playing for the Canucks, they were shit. Most penalty minutes in a playoff year, 116. Most penalty minutes in a playoff series, 51. That's up to 7 games, by the way. If it's the first round, it was 5 games. So you work that out, that's like 10 penalty minutes per game. That's 2 fights minimum. Right, career stats. Penalty minutes overall. So you play, oh my God, yeah, just lots. Right, so now we're going to look at active. So NHL I've got to learn how to spell. And I can't. Now we're going to look at overall, right? So, list of players with 2,000 penalty minutes currently, right? Oh my God. Okay, so obviously Tiger Williams, Dale Hunter played more games, got less penalty minutes. So Tiger Williams played 962 games and just regular season. We're not talking playoffs here, okay? 3,966. Dale Hunter played 19 seasons, so he played more seasons, played 1,407 games. He got 3,565 penalty minutes. Ty Domi, 16 seasons, 1,020 games, 3,515 penalty minutes. Marty McSorley, he got banned for the head chop to Donald Brashear. 961 games played in 17 seasons, 3,381 penalty minutes. We've got Bob Probert, 3,300. Rob Ray, 3,207. Ruby, who's currently a coach of the St. Louis Blues, 3,149. He's seventh. Tim Hunter, 3,146. Knuckles Nyland, Chris Nyland, 3,043. Then we have Rick Tocchet, 2,972. Pat Verbeek, legendary player, 2,905. Chris Chelios, the first Hall of Famer on the list, still had 2,891 penalty minutes over 26 seasons. That is insane. Dave Manson, 2,792. Scott Stevens, the Decapitator, 2,634 penalty minutes in 16 seasons. 2,785, sorry, in 22 seasons. Scott Stevens ended careers for fun. But most of his hits now would be bans, back then, legal. Donald Brashear, McSorley to the head, 2,634 penalty minutes in 16 years. Willie Plett, 2,572. Gino Odjick, 2,567. Matthew Barnaby, oh, he's jokes. I love Barney. I love Barney's. 2,562. Gary Roberts, 2,560. Chris Neal, all played with Ottawa, by the way. That is pretty good going. 15 seasons with one team in the NHL. That is amazing. 2,522. Joe Couture. Go Couture. Couture, yes, is how you pronounce it. 2,519. Ken Danico, legendary defenseman. Not known for his goal scoring, but the guy who does the announcing of the Jet Devils. 2,516. Brendan Shanahan, Hall of Famer. 2,489. 21 seasons. Scott Mellenby, 2,479. Basil McRae, 2,457. Ulf Samuelsson, absolute filthy, dirty player. Lots of suspensions there, hence why he's played less games than others. 2,453. Now, Basil McRae only played 576 games. Imagine if he had a career like Tiger Williams, he would have broken that record, but no. Jeff Odgers, 2,364. Jay Wells, 2,359. These are still a lot of insane penalty minutes. Shane Corson, I remember watching him play, 2,357. While Odeline, 2,316. Brian Marchman, 2,307. Garth Butcher, 2,302. Shane Churla, 2,301, one penalty minute. That's got to be frustrating on that list. Kelly Buchberg, I remember watching him play, 2,297. He was a hard-nosed little man. Dave Schultz. So if you watch the Philadelphia, Broad Street Bullies documentary, he got 2,294. He could fight. Laurie Boschman, the original Jets. Thank you. 2,263. Brad May, I remember him. Baumgartner. There's still no active players on this list. This is ridiculous. There are no active players who got over 2,000 penalty minutes. Oh, yeah. So there's 55 players who have over 2,000 penalty minutes. That is insane. And there's Hall of Famers in there. There are currently, there's no active players currently on the penalty list all time. That is insane. I don't think any of the active players break the 2,000 penalty minute barrier. There's a couple with like 1,500 penalty. it's insane. There was an era where it was quite a brutal time to be a hockey player. It's less brutal now. They still fight, but some of those penalty hits. I mean, it is a bit ridiculous. But yeah, they still fight. But I think the highest penalised game I think involved the Flyers, ironically, and it's in living memory. It's not that long ago. There was over 600 penalty minutes in a game. So that's an interesting one. Oh, I don't know. Honestly, just look at some. I'm just checking some of my emails at the same time, but it's ridiculous. Some of those penalty counts and how many Hall of Famers are in there as well. The game has evolved, but it is what it is. Tiger Williams, Jesus Christ, he played a lot of games as well, but Jesus Christ, you work out how many games he played regular season plus playoffs. You work out how many games he played, and then you divide by games played for penalty minutes, and you work out how many penalties per game he was taking, and he was still scoring goals and still actively playing over 15 to 20 minutes a night. Average ice time. Just let that sink in. His average ice time did not drop below double figures in his career. You let that sink in. 60-minute game, your average ice time for a pretty elite player is anywhere between 15 and sometimes 30 minutes. Right? If your ice time is below that, you're on the third line, fourth line, third pairing defence. Right? If your ice time is above that and you've still got that many penalty minutes, generally terrifying. How Tiger Williams. Can you imagine if he spent less time in the penalty box and more time on the ice? Jesus Christ. It's generally terrifying. It's hilarious, but terrifying at the same time. He retired the year before I was born. Oh, I'm pissed off. But you look at look at Tiger Williams' highlight reel. It's he would just you knew you were going to have a tough night when he's in the lineup. You just generally knew you're going to have a tough evening at the office. Same with Chris Nyland, Bob Probert. There are some other big name players who've got high penalty minutes who aren't on that top 55 list who haven't broken 2,000 penalty minutes. That is generally the fact that Ron Hextall and Billy Smith haven't broken the 2,000 penalty minute barrier, and they were known to be hard-nosed goaltenders, just tells you how many fights these guys had and how dirty some of these players were. Ulf Samuelsson doesn't surprise me. What surprises me is Claude Lemieux is not on that list. Yeah, Claude Lemieux. Pepe Le Pew is not on that list. Well, he might have been. I might have skirted over him, but he's not in the top 20. That's generally, and he was an agitator. He could fight. How he's not on that list. So you work out how many games Tiger Williams has played, you regular season, then you add in his playoff games as well, so his overall career, and then divide the games by penalty minutes, and you work out how many penalties per game he's taking. It is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. Tiger Williams, you divide career games, regular season, and playoffs in the NHL only. Don't look at his junior. So pre-draft year, don't look at that. So his professional career from 74 to 88, you work out how many games he played. You divide the penalty minutes by games played, you work out how many penalty minutes per game he's taking on average. And then you work out how many fights and minor penalties are in there and game misconducts. And you'll be stunned how he managed to get how many goals. He's got a good goal scoring record. He can score goals. They're not outlawing fighting from the game, but the game has evolved. So you can't just be a 5-minute goon anymore. You have to be able to contribute at least double figures in ice time minutes. You have to be able to roll 4 lines, 3 defensive pairings. The game has evolved. They've taken line brawls are heavily punished. I think because the game has evolved, there are still dirty players in the game. There are still fighters in the game. The fighters can score. So you look at Ryan Reeves. He can score goals. He's a good shutdown player. He's a good third, fourth liner. he's also the toughest son of a bitch in the NHL right now. You look at Wilson at the Capitals, dirty player, sure, fine, sure. He's a first, second liner. There's going to be good forechecking players, good hard-nosed defensemen who will take hits, give hits, and fight. The game's evolved, though. There's still going to be penalties in there. There's still going to be fights in there. There's still going to be players with high penalty minute counts. There are players actively who've got over 1,000 penalty minutes in the game. The fact that Tiger Williams will never be reached by any active player in the NHL. Other leagues, however, there are players who've got more penalty minutes. Professional hockey, but not in the NHL. Those records never get broken. We might see a rise in penalty minutes this season and more fighting and more, because it's a condensed season. Every match matters. You lose a couple of games in a row, you're out the playoffs because it's a shortened season. So we might see penalty minutes per game go up. And there are some games where there's a lot of penalties. So we could see an increase in fighting. Teams will start to dislike each other. There'll be a lot of penalty minutes dished out. I don't think the NHL is actually going to stamp out certain things. There's going to be head contact. It's unavoidable. It's how you punish deliberate hits to the head to accidental hits to the head, mitigating circumstances. There are certain players who basically been suspended out of the game. But the fact there's Hall of Famers on that list tells you something about how the game has evolved. Because Brendan Shanahan only retired in the 2000s, so he's in living memory that he played. Probert played in my lifetime. Ty Domi played in my lifetime. Kishore played in my lifetime. There are some players that predate my time watching the sport, and it predate my life on that list. And there are other players that actively were playing when I was watching the game growing up. So Scott Stevens, yeah, he actively played. Ken Danico actively played while I was growing up watching the game. They were teammates as well at one point, I think, on the Devils. There are players on that list who predate my time watching and my lifetime. I don't think any player ever breaks that top 55 ever again. There's one or two that could break in the top 100. I think there are some active players who are currently in the top 100, but they're not on the same level. There are some. I'm surprised Sean Avery isn't higher on that list, to be fair. But there are some players who, yeah, their goal was to beat. So there were some players who were just generally dirty players. There are other players who were just goons, just there to fight. Tiger Williams was a goon who could play, and he was a dirty, hard note. I mean, Jesus Christ, if Tiger Williams is playing now, he's suspended half the season. Let's just put that out there. They are suspending him. If Scott Stevens is playing now, 60% of the hits that he gave in his era are now classed as suspendable plays. Wilson is the Scott Stevens of this era. Brad Marchand is the Claude Lemieux of this era. They've been suspended a lot. They do take penalties. They also could score a lot of goals, so you want them on the ice rather than off the ice. But no, it's part of the game. It's a hard-nosed game. The game has evolved. The speed of the game, the fitness of the players. You can't have that goon anymore. Whose only role on the team is just to drop the gloves and fight. They have to be able actively to play. The fact that in the modern era there is a game that ranks the top penalty minutes in the modern era is astounding. But there are some games that just generally degenerate into mass brawls. It happens even in the NHL now, where the two teams just hate each other. The players don't like each other. The players aren't always friends off the ice either. That's something you will know. There is an intense hatred between certain players. Other players, even though they might have fought each other a lot, actually get on off the ice. They are good friends. Just listen to Ty Domi and his interview on Spitting Chicklets when he's on the podcast. It is striking how away from the game he's softly spoken. He does a lot of charity work. He gets on with some of his ex-opponents really well. They're really good friends. There's like a club kind of thing. There's like the Goons Club or the Enforcers Club. The true Goon Enforcer, I don't know the term Goon Enforcer, has died out. You've got to be able to play at least 10 minutes a game now. The modern game is so quick, so fast-paced. The game has evolved. Whether we see a bit more of a return to an 80s, 90s style with more physicality is another thing. What is key, though, is the NHL is clamping down on hits to the head, dirty play. And a lot of those players on that list did have lengthy suspensions. I mean, if Scott Stevens, who is a Hall of Fame defenseman, he's admitted, at the time, my hits were legal. They were classed as legal plays. If I was playing now, I'm suspended half the time. So a change in rules and in attitudes and in the style of play, the game has evolved. Fighting's always been a doggy. It's not going to be eradicated. However, and the NHL has not actually said we want to take this out of the game. We know it sells tickets. We know the fans love the physical side of the game. We also know the skill players, the fans love some of the skills as well. Can't have one without the other. You need a bit of both. And sometimes you will see some really skillful players drop the mitts. Oh, yeah. You will see players who you think, these are scorers. Ovechkin's full. The Ovechkin-Svechnikov fight. Svechnikov is the young Ovechkin, basically. He's 18, 19 years old, drops the mitts against Ovechkin. And he could have knocked Ovechkin out, and Ovechkin knocks him out. Just because Ovechkin's a bit bigger. Bang. Svechnikov will fight. Dylan Larkin will fight. Mike Schlafly will fight. Conor McDavid and Sidney Crosby will fight. They have got fighting majors against them. But they have like Zach Cassian. There you go. The Kachuk brothers will fight, and they're superstar players. They will happily go toe to toe. Shane Doan fought a lot. Jerome McGinley, all the fights. So, and these are superstar players that you want, the enforcers to protect. No, they can protect themselves. That's why they're leaders on their teams. At the same time, I think the NHL wants to clean up some of the dirty play. Some of the players on that list didn't necessarily fight a lot. They just had a lot of cheap shots. Ulf Samuelsson, oh my God, one of the most hated players ever to play the game. He's a European. And when you got Don Cherry saying these Europeans are soft, have you seen Ulf Samuelsson, some of the dirty hits he lashed out? Yeah, no. Ryan Wilson is a dirty player. There's no denying that. Capitals fans cannot defend some of his actions. He can fight as well. But you look at the highlight reels for dirty plays in the recent seasons, Brad Marchand and Ryan Wilson, they come up a lot. They come up a lot every season with suspicious dirty plays. Yes, the NHL is trying to clamp down on certain headshots. Same with rugby league and rugby union, headshots. Players are getting longer suspensions for hitting the old head deliberately with the focal point contact. 10, 20 years ago, you could get away with decapitating someone. Now you can't. The game has evolved, but I love it when they fight. They're fighting. They're fighting. When it's all fighting, though, it does get a bit annoying. You want to have that rivalry between teams, that dislike between teams. There are certain players who don't get on with each other. It's a known thing. They're not friends off the ice either. But yeah, you will see friends drop mitts against each other. There is still got to answer. But my God, there's some dirty players out there. You get that in every game, every sport. In rugby league, there's the grub. In rugby union, there's that player who's been cited a lot. Joe Marler is one that springs to mind with a poor disciplinary record. Cian Healy's got a poor disciplinary record. Mahoney with his red card, he's done it before. Whether you say they're dirty players or not, they've got a track record. They have a history of being dirty. There are some players that do have that reputation, but at the same time, on the same token, there are some players that generally miss time challenges, get things wrong, and there's other players. I mean, Thomas Repka, there you go. You want to talk about a dirty player. Sergio Ramos has nothing on Thomas Repka. Check out Thomas Repka, former West Ham guy, played alongside Slaven Bilic and Paolo Di Canio, West Ham legend. I think finished his career at Slavia Prague, where he started his career. Thomas Repka makes Vinnie Jones look like a saint. Most red cards in professional football, Thomas Repka. Most Premier League red cards as well. Hard-nosed centre-back. Not enough of them are in the game these days. But football's evolved. The amount of players who dive and simulate injury is ridiculous. Neymar and others dive too much. But if Neymar was playing against Thomas Repka, he's having his leg shattered. I'm going to tell you that. He's being knocked out. He's being hacked down. Thomas Repka would have If Neymar was playing 10, 15, 20 years earlier, Thomas Repka is first corner, first free kick, has lined him up, and is going to take him out. It doesn't matter if he's giving away a penalty or not, he's leaving his mark on that player. Vinnie Jones, another player who was hard nosed. Dennis Wise, great agitator. You don't have these Vieira, Keane, these rival Alvin Haaland, but they hated each other. These guys took lumps out of each other in the 90s and the 2000s. The game's evolved. It's not necessarily for the better either, because players are now afraid to tackle. When you've got players like Claude Makelele, who can tackle cleanly but be physical, get away with it, and not get sent off all the time, it's a lost art. Rugby union, I understand they're trying to obviously protect the heads, player welfare. Rugby league, the same. There's calls to, headshots, longer suspensions. I completely understand that. Ice hockey's the same. But these are some of the. This is why these games are like what I think is the ice hockey, the greatest show on earth. Stop the Super Bowl. People, the Super Bowl is just commercial. The Stanley Cup, it's up to 7 games of brutal playoff hockey where you're going to drop the mitts. There's going to be some dirty hits. There's going to be some skillful play, and it's a brutal slugfest. To win the Stanley Cup, you've got to win a minimum of 16 games in the playoffs. So that means you've won every series 4-0. That doesn't happen. Okay, real life. Stanley Cup winning teams, they will drop games. To win the Stanley Cup, if every game goes to 7 series, that's 4 series of 7. That's an insane amount of games you've got to play. I don't think any team has ever done a full 4-7 game series to win the Stanley Cup, because they're just you'd be broken by the end. But playoff hockey is intense, brutal. Regular season is brutal, and it ramps up throughout the season. You start off sloppy, and you build and you build and you build. It's a brutal 82 game schedule normally, with up to 4 7-game series to win the Stanley Cup. It's a brutal sport. Rugby league and rugby union, okay, player welfare, they play less games. Some players have the Ironman streak. I mean, Keith Yandle's Ironman streak is ridiculous how many consecutive games he's played. That in itself is a Hall of Fame worthy career, even without the lack of success with the Stanley Cup. Keith Yandle is a machine with his regular. He hasn't missed a game. This guy plays hurt. I forget who had. Who was it who played with a broken shoulder? There was a play with a broke. Mario Lemieux. At one point, he couldn't even tie his own skates. His back was that destroyed. The fact that his heart condition and his cancer treatment, obviously, he played while going through cancer treatment, played through chemotherapy. And Mario Lemieux, you can say, had he had an injury-free career, he would have been better than Gretzky. Most likely, yes. The debate's out there. He missed so many games because of injury. But here, at one point, when they're on the interstate flights, he had to stand. He couldn't sit down. And to get changed, he had to have teammates lace his skates for him. He could not bend down. Yet he still is a Hall of Famer and multiple Stanley Cup winner as an owner and as a player. Jaromir Jagr, he's trying to reach 50. He says he wants to play until he's 50. His knees are blown up. There's a reason why he's not playing in the NHL. They had to drain his knee at Calgary to the point where, your NHL career is done. You're done as a player. He's still playing in Kladno. He's still playing in the Czech League. His knees were destroyed. Brilliant player. Rugby league, Joey Johns played with a punctured lung. Cooper Cronk played with a broken shoulder. These player welfare, you got to sometimes go, really? But at the same time, it's that will to win. But yeah, because no active players have broken the 2,000 point barrier, do you think there's an active attempt to stamp out that kind of behaviour? No, it's just stamp out the dirty play. You're still going to have hooking and holding and cross-checking penalties. You're still going to have the fighting majors. I think what the NHL is doing, along with other professional sports, is head contact. Rugby union, rugby league, head contact, hits the head. They're trying to stamp out that kind of dirty play where you're deliberately hitting the player to knock him out. And there are some dirty players who just keep doing it. Zach Ronaldo, Ryan Wilson, Tom Wilson, sorry. Not Ryan Wilson's a different player. Tom Wilson. For the last 20 minutes, I got the name fucking wrong. There's more than one Wilson who plays ice hockey. It's blown my mind. Tom Wilson, that's the one. Brad Marchand, his where he goes underneath the player to flip him over his shoulders. He keeps doing that. He's done that to several players. There are some players who do have a reputation for being dirty. There's other players who miss time challenges and miss time hits, and there's other players who have got lengthy suspensions. Rafi Torres was known for headshotting people long after the rules had changed. So Scott Stevens has said, and I will quote this, Scott Stevens, who's a Hall of Famer and possibly one of the best defensemen ever to play the game, has stated that 60 to 70% of his hits that he dished out then are now classed as suspendable now. But he says the game was different and I was playing within the rules. Also, I dropped in a few dirty hits in there. I'm not going to say I'm the same. But Scott Stevens, what he says about the game evolving, and he goes, yeah, no, if I was playing now, I would be suspended half the time. I'll be hurting my team actively on the ice by being suspended. If I'm their best defenseman, I'm not playing. I'm hurting the team. So yeah, the sport's evolved with the NHL. Same with rugby union. You saw the injury to Jack Willis yesterday. The ruck area needs to be sorted out. There's going to be a rule change because of that. He's not the first player to have an injury like that. I think he was a player with a dislocated hip last season. But guess what? It's not an illegal play. What caused him to get injured is not illegal, technically. Although when I was growing up playing the game, if you're on the floor, you're out the play. You're no longer active. If you're on the floor in rugby, you're no longer active. That interpretation has changed. Well, rugby needs to look at it. If they've got rid of the neck roll and the 2 red cards we've seen in the Six Nations so far with the illegal clearing out, again, if a player is not active and he's on the floor, he's out the game. So you could argue the injury was avoidable to Jack Willis yesterday. And I honestly believe the Italian player, feels bad. I'm not saying it was a deliberate action to hurt him, but they need to eradicate that to avoid those kind of injuries. Rugby league, again, head contact. There's a debate about the tackle area, the wrestle, the chicken wing as it's called, where they pull the arm back. That has the crusher tackle. All these contact sports, the head and neck area, they're trying to eliminate or try and reduce and mitigate the amount of head and neck contact that's illegal. There's going to be accidental collisions. There's going to be accidental head and neck contacts. That's unavoidable. But again, there's been an active push by rugby league, rugby union, ice hockey to take the head shots out of the game. Players will still get things wrong with high tackles and headshots. You're not going to completely stamp it out. They're going to be more mistimed and accidental than deliberate. But there are those players that are dirty, and you look at the citing commissions and the player safety boards and all that. The inconsistency in suspension is also frustrating as well. If you follow any NHL YouTubers, and if you follow like Sportsnet or TSN, those kind of and NBC and all that on YouTube, when they talk about players being suspended, consistency. Mahoney got a lengthy suspension. I think it's 5-6 weeks, something like that, because there's bye weeks and there's rest weeks, which I can't stand in Six Nations. I think it should be a straight 5-week tournament with no rest weeks. He got suspended for his hit. I can see Xander Fagerson having a similar length suspension. Even with the mitigating circumstances, it's exactly the same hit. The difference is the player that he cleared out was actively involved in the ruck. The difference between Mahoney and Fagerson, I think, which will reduce the length of suspension Xander Fagerson faces, he will still get suspended, which is going to frustrate fans going, well, they're consistent with the red card. We get that. It's the length of suspension. We'll see what the citing commissioner has to say with Xander Fagerson. But the red card was justified because they're now being consistent. They can't have a difference in consistency from one game to the next. It's basically carbon copy hits where they tuck the arm in and they drill the head. I'm sorry. Whether they're deliberate or not, Mahoney's got previous with that. Xander Fagerson, while the player's still active in the ruck, he's got his clear out wrong and he's hit the head. What is ironic is both teams were in possession of the ball. It was their ball. So they've hurt their own team. Can you argue that it still happens? Well, yeah. What is interesting, it was the same TMO both times, and it's also an English referee both times. That's something for a pub quiz. But the play is called back, and it has had an impact on the game. Now, if we see a similar incident today, I expect the same consistency. Because if they deem it a yellow card with mitigating circumstances, I'm going to be scratching my head because there was mitigating circumstances for Xander Fagerson's hit on Wyn Jones. Mahoney has no mitigating circumstances. The player is out of play, out of the game. who he clears out. So I expect for Xander Fagerson to have a shorter suspension. I still expect him to get suspended. If the suspension is the same length, then they haven't taken in the mitigating circumstances that the player that he's clearing out the ruck is still active. But again, it's a headshot. The referee on the field has given a red. The TMO has said, well, there is some mitigating circumstances. Do you feel they're strong enough to give a yellow rather than a red? I don't think they were. We'll see what happens today in the Ireland-France game if there's a similar incident that happens, because we know the French have a temperament issue. We know that Ireland now have had a player sent off, and again, it's a technique issue. It will be interesting to see what happens if there's a similar incident in the Ireland-France game today, which kicks off in 45 minutes. If there is, and the punishment's a yellow card, then I will blow up refereeing consistency. And I will do a video on refereeing consistency when it comes to suspension, headshot, and whether it's deemed a send-off offence or in the ice hockey sense, suspendable, you're thrown out the game misconduct. And this is what I'm looking from game to game, is consistency, and we're not getting that. 2 games in a row is fine, but if we have that third game where there's a similar incident and it's deemed a yellow, then the question mark has to be asked, okay, why is the consistency different? And it's the referee's interpretation of the laws or rules of the sport. So that's an interesting one. But it links back to your question, has the NHL or a Pacific league decided to stamp out that kind of play? Yes. They're trying to knock... the reason why penalty minutes are lower in the NHL is the speed of the game has increased, and therefore to take silly penalties, which a lot of the guys on that list did, because not all of them are pure enforcers, that they also could score and contribute with assists, is they're trying to take out the dirty hits. They're trying to take out basically sucker punches, hits to the head, that kind of thing. And notice a lot of them played a lot of seasons, missed a lot of games because of suspension and injury. So missing games hurts your team as well. And a lot of those guys were key players on their teams. They're not just pure enforcers. They could also score. I mean, Bob Probert could score. Joey Couture was on the same line as Bob Probert. They could score goals. In his rookie season, he was the best rookie in the league for goal scoring. Yet he also had the highest penalty minutes for a rookie. Probert and Couture could score. They could contribute shutting down the opposition. The fact they could also fight as well, very, very good at it. They could play 15, 20 minutes a night. They were key in playoffs. Claude Lemieux doesn't even make the top 20. Has a lot of penalty minutes. I think he actually makes the top 55 for penalty minutes. He's still over 1,500 penalty minutes. He could score. But it's taking out dirty hits from the game. You're still going to have, fights. You're still going to have hooking, holding, slashing, tripping, slew footing. They're still going to be in there. Slew footing is they're trying to take that out of the game because they can do your knee. Knee on knee is nasty because you can just blow someone's knee up, and I've seen it happen. But there's still going to be those penalties where the defender, the player without the puck, coming back is going to give away a penalty. Sometimes it's forward back checking and they get it wrong. Sometimes it is a defenseman, blindside hit. There's going to be missed time challenges, but they are actively clamping down on dirty play, and that is fine. Same with Union, same with Rugby League. But they are trying to clamp down on this kind of stuff. There's still going to be penalties in the game. Some games are quite testy and fighty, and there's lots of hits and boarding and charging and cross-checking and some dirty play in there. Some rivalry games just boil it up. But in the long term, the penalties per game is going down as well. And there was a period of time where goal scoring was really suppressed in the 90s, and the product they were trying to sell wasn't as appetizing to the overseas market, which is something that's hurt the NHL, is the lack of an American TV deal. When they're trying to grow the game in the US with expansion, the game in the 90s did hit rock bottom for goal scoring. It became a very slow-paced, crap game. And we had 3 lockouts. 2 of them happened in the 90s, 2000s, when goal scoring was really at a low. And the NHL just didn't want that. They worked out it was becoming a desirable product, not because of the fighting and the big hits. It was the lack of goal scoring. Teams became very defensively minded and just shut the game down. The skilled players didn't have the space. There was a lot of holding and hooking penalties in there to speed the game up, those are now being called all the time now. Whether fans go, that's not really a hook. If you look historically, the game is evolving. And the speed and the pace of the players, the physicality of the players, they're bigger and stronger now than what they were 20 years ago. They're fitter and bigger than what they were 20 years ago. So the collisions are bigger. They're still 30% smaller on average body mass than an NFL player, but they hit twice as hard. There you go. They hit a bigger pace. Some of the open ice hits are like the equivalent of having a car accident. And some of those players that dish out the hits, their careers are shorter as well because their body wears down. Nicholas Cromwell, he was done by the end. Lindros, done by the end. He had a very short career in Hall of Fame terms because of his physical style of play. Rugby union players, I mean, you look at some of these big union players now, some of them are done before they're 30. I mean, Keith Wood, who is possibly one of my favourite players of all time because I grew up watching Keith Wood. Even when Ireland were bad, he was still chugging away 110%. He had to retire because his neck and shoulder were wrecked. And his surgeon said, "We cannot. You could be you could. It's your life after rugby. We've got to look after you." Pat Lambie, one of my favourite players, could play fullback, could play fly half, retired early because of repeat concussions. He wasn't the same player. You look at Greg Inglis, his career towards the end, his knees were just destroyed. His knees were wrecked. And that led to him having issues with alcohol and mitigating circumstances. Football players, I mean, Dean Ashton was done at 25. His ankle was wrecked, couldn't play anymore. Santi Cazorla, his ankle was wrecked. The fact he's still playing is an amazing thing, but the amount of injuries he sustained. Player welfare post-retirement is key. I've done videos on it, and they don't get a lot of views. And this is what pisses me off is, yes, the NHL, rugby union, rugby league, they're trying to take the dirty hits out of the game, player welfare. And that's great. But it's post-retirement. Some of these players are retiring really young. This is why they get some of the bigger salaries, is because, your career could be done in a heartbeat. You could be 21, 22 and your career done. And it's looking after these players post-playing. And this is where a lot of professional sports fall down with post-playing care. And this is where lawsuits have been brought against organisations for not looking after the players when they're playing. And Bugard, the former Rangers and Minnesota Wild player, yeah, he was a pure enforcer of the purest sense. He could skate a bit, but he was just a big bloke who could fight. And he didn't score many goals and get many assists, so he was just there to beat the shit out of people. He died very young. He accidentally overdosed on prescription medication, and that's because the team, the Rangers and the Wild, weren't looking after him properly. They were prescribing him these painkillers when he should have been basically rested and taken longer to heal. Doesn't matter that he was an enforcer. Let's not try and say, oh, fighting's bad for the game. It sells tickets. But player welfare is not just the hand injuries, the head injuries. It's the knees, your ankles, your shoulder. I mean, crikey, some players are playing on one leg. Like Eric Carlson, his ankle is destroyed. He has been basically playing the last 4.5 years on one leg. Still a world-class player. There's a reason why his goal scoring and his game is down the last couple of years. It's because he's basically playing hurt. Peter Forsberg played with a ruptured spleen. Didn't realise when he died. His body was wrecked. Hall of Famer, wrecked body though. Rugby union. I mean, Andrew Sheridan retired because still could be playing today. Retired young. Dylan Hartley, too many concussions. Pat Barrett. I mean, I could list off players who haven't been looked after when they were playing. And this is where I have concerns with the head injury assessment and some players coming back to the field who clearly should not be playing when they've been knocked out. I've raised that several times on this channel. That how he recovered from that concussion is the guy is. I think if you go for an HIA, that's you done for the game. Regardless if you pass the HIA protocol, it's still deemed fit enough that you have to have a head assessment. I think that should be you done. I don't think you should return to play. Personal opinion. Take it completely out of the players' hands. If they've got to go for an HIA and sit out in the quiet room and go through the questions and go through the assessment, that's your game done. Whether you pass that, concussion can be a slow onset. You can pass the HIA there and then and show symptoms that night or the next day or the week later, and then suddenly you're out the game. And that's where someone raises the question, well, how stringent is the HIA protocol? If you've got to go to the quiet room, then you should not return to play. Personal opinion, you should be rested for the next game. Personal opinion, and you should be monitored for the next couple of weeks. I've had concussion. I can tell you, it's not pleasant. I've been knocked out playing rugby. It's not a pleasant feeling. I've been knocked out playing football at school as well. It's not pleasant when you like that and your bells are ringing in your head, just like a bomb's gone off in it. It's not pleasant. I know what concussion feels like. You feel like you're drunk when it's not a pleasant kind of drunk. Instead of like having a few bevies and going, wait, you're like, I feel like I'm going to be sick. Like your knees turn to jelly. You can't stand up, and you're like this. Yeah, you're done. I think it was Morgan Parra got knocked out in a European Cup game where he's clearly unconscious and he returned to play when he shouldn't have. He was done. Absolutely done. So, in my view, I think if a player has to go off for an HIA, that's him done for the game, regardless if he passes or not. I think they need to strip, because concussion can be delayed onset. I've had a mate get a concussion in a motorcycle accident. He rear-ended me, ironically. 6 hours later, he collapsed in my arms, and I had to take him to the hospital. He didn't want to go to hospital at the time. Turned out he had broken his hand, broken his kneecap. Oh yeah, that's the thing. He broke his kneecap in the middle, concussed himself, fractured his skull, and I think tore his groin as well. Yeah, he really fell off that bike, and he was out cold. And I said, even now, he doesn't remember the accident. He doesn't remember about 5 minutes of his life, and I have to fill him in about how I found him, all that kind of stuff. So if you're talking about player welfare, if you go for an HIA, you're done for the game. It doesn't matter what sport you're playing. And if you pass or not, if you're going for an assessment, that is you wrap him in cotton wool, save him for next week, or observe him over with an independent doctor to say that this guy's fit to play. Because players are playing when they've been clearly concussed in the previous game, in the NRL, in the Super League, in rugby union. Doesn't matter if it's club or international level. In ice hockey, they are done and they're back to the next game. And I'm like, how the hell is this guy? I remember watching. As you can see, I'm wearing my bees hoodie. A Bison bees game at the old Bracknell Ice Rink, which doesn't exist anymore. Well, it does, but it's indefinitely closed. The Basingstoke player, he was drilled. Absolutely clean hit, but unfortunately it turned out that the player who hit him had come from a distance, and therefore it's classed as charging, and it was a length suspension, and there was debate about that. But I rewatched the video of the hit that someone had filmed from upstairs, because I was at a wrong angle to see the hit. And he's like that, and they're carrying off, and his legs are gone, absolutely gone. And there was a return fixture the next weekend. We were playing again. That same player who has been drilled into the boards and has turned to basically human jelly, where he can't stand up, was playing within a week. I'm thinking to myself, I know it's lower levels of the game, and squad sizes are smaller, rosters are smaller, but that guy should not be playing. I've seen a guy take a puck to the face, have all his front teeth knocked out. That's with a gum shield, just teeth gone, blood everywhere, and yeah, he was done, concussed. Hell, his jaw just exploded, and I was right in line with it, and his teeth just flew out. When I say his teeth flew out, they flew out. You actually saw teeth, chiclets as they called. Yeah, he was done. He tried to come back. I remember the Hull Pirates goalie. He took a puck to the face, so his mask failed. So helmet change, and it split his head open. Right, his eye up here just missed his actual eyeball. The metal went in, ripped his head. When you're hitting the head with a puck that's traveling at about 100 miles an hour and it smashes you in the face, it's going to hurt, even with the gear on. Glancing blow is different when you actually get a full front. Right, and he was like jelly. He tried to play on. They patch him up. He plays on. The backup goalie goes in for a 5 minutes. They patch him up. Bit of hockey tape, bit of a plaster, bit of a bandage, spare helmet. The next 3 shots he faces, he doesn't know where he is. And when I say he doesn't know where he is, he returns to play, and he doesn't know he can't work out the puck coming out his head. 3 goals go in, he doesn't know what's going on. 2 goals went off like 3 shots. He really didn't know where the puck was, right? The backup goes in and has a nightmare because he's 16, 17 years old. But the starting goalie, he's clearly concussed because he saw the puck hit in the head and he goes down. He goes down, he's done. And there was quite a bit of claret coming out of his head. And he returned to play. I've seen it in the Elite League. I've seen it in the Swedish League. I've seen it in the Champions Hockey League, which is the European ice hockey equivalent of the Champions League and Europa League, right? I've seen it in the NHL. I've seen it in AHL games. Players clearly concussed, they are struggling off the ice or they're helped off, and they come back. And I'm thinking to myself, how the hell has that player passed the protocol? I'm seriously asking that question. And I've argued this with player welfare post-retirement, and it's not just headshots. It's not. It's the shoulders. It's your back. It's your ribs. It's your internals. It's your muscles. It's your ligaments. It's your knee. Some of these players are playing through injuries that they shouldn't, for a variety of reasons. A, they don't want to let the team down, or B, they're just gritting their teeth and getting through it. I mean, John Terry, well, we can slag off football and say, you know, they're all soft. He played an entire season with a broken foot requiring surgery and played on. I think he won trophies that season with Chelsea. Vincent Kompany played an entire season with a broken foot. And we're saying, oh, look, they're football players, they're soft. No, these are hard-nosed defenders who don't go down easily. They played through injuries that then hampered them the following season, where they had lengthy spells on the side. Ledley King, his knees were so bad, he could only play one game in 3 and could only train once every 2 weeks. So they used him for the big games because his knees were wrecked. Jonathan Woodgate, knee injuries did for him. Best defender this country's ever produced, in my personal opinion. And I'm including that alongside some of the greats of the World Cup 66 side. Jonathan Woodgate is the best defender this country has ever produced. Injuries decimated his career. Hamstrings, knees, done. He's a pretty decent manager, by the way. But you know, his time at Real Madrid, he was decimated by knee injuries. He just ruined his career. Best player this country's ever produced, defensively. And that is my personal opinion on Jonathan Woodgate. Very underrated centre-back. I think it's the best defender this country's ever produced. I look at some of these other players who've got longevity, like Gigi Buffon. He stayed remarkably injury-free, apart from the Euro 2000 where he was injured and then Toldo was in goal. Apart from that tournament, he's pretty much been consistent for Italy for 20-odd years. Dino Zoff stayed injury-free. Other players, more injuries. Disrupts their careers. And then it's the post-playing days, because not all these players are well paid. We look at how the top stars are paid and the top league is paid, but you get down to lower levels, there are guys there playing for the love of the game. Doesn't matter what sport they're playing for the love of the game. They're not getting paid a lot, and their careers are generally short and injury prone, and then post-career, what they do? They're thrown on the scrap heap. It's a problem. But I've been going on for 3 hours. Thank you very much for all the questions. I'm going to wind this up because I've got to prep 4 videos for the next couple of days for the rugby, the NRL season previews. A lot to talk about in those 4 videos that are upcoming for those 4 teams. I will assure you that. And I've got to prep, obviously, for the France-Ireland game in the Six Nations, which is now into the build-up phase. So I'm going to be going offline for a bit. I'm going to be watching on the internet on a live stream, which is legal, which I am paying for, which is all through the broadcaster. I think it's through ITV they're playing, so I'll be watching that. And then I'm going to get back with a match review of Ireland-France, and you'll see, obviously, some videos to do with the NRL season previews. 4 videos left, so there's going to be about 4 or 5 videos this evening. And then I'll be back on another live stream possibly next Sunday. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll have some more videos for you soon. And of course, do not forget to like and subscribe if you've just stumbled across this stream, or if you're watching this stream later on, hit the like and subscribe button and check out my content. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys very, very soon.